Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Heather Elvis. Heather Rachelle Elvis was born on June 30, 1993, in Horry County, South Carolina, to Terry and Debbie Elvis. She was described as a determined, free-spirited, and vibrant individual with a large, outgoing personality. Heather had a passion for makeup and aspired to pursue it as a career. A talented, cheerful 20-year-old girl, she actively shares her thoughts and interests on social networks. Heather is known to be somewhat rebellious, living life her own way without regard for other people's opinions. After graduating from St. James High School in Maules Inlet in 2011, eager to experience her independence, Heather's parents allowed her to move into an apartment in Myrtle Beach with her best friend Brianna. To make ends meet while studying cosmetology, Heather had two part-time jobs, one at the House of Blues in North Myrtle Beach and another at a Scottish-themed restaurant called the Tilted Kiln in Myrtle Beach. She had a good job, great friends, a very close-knit family, and everything in her life seemed to be in order. However, she had secrets her family didn't know about and wouldn't discover until it was too late. On a warm summer afternoon in 2013, while Heather was working her usual shift at the Tilted Oven, she caught the attention of an older man, who was the maintenance worker, Sidney Moore. Sidney was a 37-year-old man, married with 3 kids. His wife, Tammy, was a 40-year-old stay-at-home mom who worked part-time as a travel agent, and they had been married since 1997. Sidney had his own maintenance business and would often come in to repair things in the restaurant's kitchen. Heather had a crush on Sidney, even though he's much older than her, and the two have had some innocent flirtations at work. Heather would confide in her friend Brianna about the things he would say to her and how smitten she was with him. Heather was deeply in love with Sidney. She confided in her sister about their strong feelings for each other and their plans for a future together. Heather was aware that Sidney had a wife, but he told her their marriage was open and that he no longer loved his wife, Tammy. Sidney even claimed Tammy had a boyfriend and they were staying together only for financial reasons and their children. As a young and naive person, Heather believed everything Sidney told her. Her friends did not approve of her relationship because he was 17 years older than Heather. In addition, Sidney had been married for 15 years to his 40-year-old wife. The affair was no secret at Heather's workplace, and she often faced ridicule from her colleagues. The situation reached the point where some colleagues wrote on a mirror at work, "Stealing a married man, that's fine, thanks." Even one of the girls called the restaurant pretending to be Tammy, looking for Heather. This scared Heather and she left work immediately, thinking that Tammy might show up at any moment. They said their relationship continued until September 2013, when Heather tweeted that once upon a time, an angel and a devil fell in love, but it did not end well, referring to her relationship with Sidney. Tammy, Sidney's wife, eventually discovered the affair, though it remains unclear how. According to people close to Heather, once Tammy learned of the affair, it caused a major upheaval. After discovering her husband's infidelity with Heather, Tammy called Heather and demanded that she end the relationship. Tammy then put Sidney on the phone, and he told Heather that she meant nothing to him, that it was over, and he insulted her in a way that severely impacted Heather's confidence and self-worth. In the following weeks, she tried to focus on rebuilding herself and directing her attention to her goals and work. However, Tammy was just getting started. Tammy forced Sidney to tattoo her name above her pubic area. She also handcuffed him to the bed at night so he couldn't escape. In the coming weeks, Tammy continued to send Heather rude messages, even calling Heather as many as 40 times a day. Heather believed that mocking Tammy was the best way to handle the situation, saying that Tammy should be worried about her husband instead of sending her messages. Tammy then followed up by sending a photo of herself and Sidney together in bed. Heather responded a few days later, on November 1st, saying that she thought Tammy was obsessed with her and that she no longer needed to worry about Tammy. On November 5th, Tammy replied that Sydney no longer had a phone, referring to Sydney's lack of a phone, which prevented him from communicating with her. Tammy also tries to get Heather fired from Tilted Kilt, calling the restaurant every day and telling them that Sydney won't fix things anymore as long as Heather works there. Heather informed Sydney that she wanted Tammy to stop calling the restaurant, as Tammy's frequent calls had caused Heather to lose hours of work and be sent home. Heather and Sydney last saw each other on November 5th after they had agreed to end their relationship. After suffering a broken heart, Heather remained determined to move forward. Those around her noticed how she had regained her smile. Things started looking up when she was offered a job at a beauty salon, bringing her closer to her professional dream. As for Tammy's messages and calls, Heather got used to ignoring them, hoping that eventually Tammy would get bored and leave her alone. On November 19th, Sydney and Tammy purchased a brand new black Ford F-150 and drove to California with their children to visit Disneyland as a way to rekindle their romance. The trip lasted for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, despite Heather's life taking a turn for the better, those around her soon started to notice that she was gaining weight. This was evident to the extent that she had to be given a new, larger uniform at work, as her usual one no longer fit. Specifically, Heather went from wearing a size A cup bra to a size C cup, and from a medium-sized skirt to a large. These changes are typically associated with pregnancy. Heather took a pregnancy test at work, but the results were inconclusive. While it was widely believed that Heather was pregnant, given the changes in her physical appearance and her intimate relationship with Sydney, the exact status of her pregnancy was uncertain. Despite this, Heather's confidence was returning, and she had arranged a date with a man closer to her age, with whom she had been conversing for some time. The situation seemed promising for Heather. It was December 17, 2013, when Heather headed out for her date. They didn't have any specific plans and were eager to get to know each other better. They went out for dinner and then drove around to check out the Christmas lights, which was one of Heather's favorite holiday activities. Later, Heather's date, Stephen Caldy, took her to the mall, where he taught her how to drive a car with a manual transmission. He also took a photo of her while she was trying to drive his car. Heather sent this photo, which showed her having fun on her date, to her best friend Brianna, who she lived with, as well as to her father Terry. According to the information provided, Heather Elvis and her date began around 10 p.m. and ended shortly after 1 a.m. After dropping Heather off at her apartment, they had plans to meet again the next day. Unfortunately, this would be the last time Heather's presence was confirmed. A little over half an hour after returning to her apartment, Heather received an unexpected call from Sydney. During the 4-minute call from a payphone, Sydney apologized to Heather and expressed his love for her. He even confessed that he had left Tammy in the hopes of being with her. At 1:44 a.m., Heather contacted her roommate Brianna, who was visiting relatives out of town. In tears, Heather told Brianna that Sydney had called to confess his love for her. Brianna advised Heather to thoughtfully evaluate the situation, not jeopardize her recent relationship with Stephen. Heather said she would think about it and then sleep, but she couldn't sleep that night. At around 2:29 a.m., Heather tried calling the number that Sydney had previously called several times, but there was no answer. At around 3:16 a.m., she attempted to call Sydney's mobile phone, but again there was no answer. Unwilling to give up, Heather called Sydney's mobile phone once more, and this time, the call lasted just over 4 minutes. The content of this phone conversation is unknown. After the call, Heather got into her car and drove to a place called Peachtree Boat Landing, which is located approximately 3 miles from the house of Sydney and Tammy. At 3:38 a.m., Heather arrived at the Peachtree dock. She tried to contact Sydney's phone again, but got no response. She made follow-up calls at 3:39 a.m., 3:41 a.m., and 3:46 a.m., but Sydney still didn't answer. While Heather was trying to meet Sydney, 2 security cameras captured a black Ford F-150 pickup, similar to the one owned by Sydney and Tammy, heading from the direction of their house towards the dock. The following day, a local police officer patrolling the area found Heather's car, a green Dodge Intrepid, parked at Peachtree Landing, on the banks of the Waccamaw River. After verifying the license plate and discovering that the vehicle was registered to Heather's father, Terry Elvis, the officers went to Heather's parents' house. They questioned Terry about the car, and since he had a spare set of keys, they went to the vehicle and noticed that Heather's keys, identification, purse, and phone were not inside. The police allowed Terry to search the vehicle and then let him take it home. Terry repeatedly tried to call Heather, but the calls went straight to voicemail. When Heather failed to show up for work, the police investigated her apartment but found no sign of her. A search for the missing Heather was initiated, and her friends and family created posters, leaflets, and a Facebook page titled "Find Heather Elvis" to aid the search. As the police investigated, suspicion soon focused on Sydney and Tammy due to evidence of text messages, phone calls, and public knowledge of the affair between Heather and Sydney. Sydney and Tammy also posted on Facebook, speaking disrespectfully of Heather and her family. Sydney referred to Heather as a girl who traded fellatio for pumpkin-spiced lattes, and Tammy posted a lengthy status about how Sydney cheated on her in September and October. Detectives gathered evidence suggesting Sydney's involvement in the case. They observed his pickup leaving the Peachtree Landing area at 3:45 a.m. and found that he had disconnected the vehicle's GPS system on the night of December 18th, making it difficult to confirm if the CCTV footage showed his vehicle. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the investigation continued. On February 21, 2014, Sydney and Tammy were arrested and charged with kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and 2 charges of indecent exposure. After an 11-hour search, they were charged with indecent exposure for taking sexually explicit pictures of themselves in public areas, as well as obstruction of justice for providing false information to the police regarding a pay phone. On February 24, 2014, the police held a press conference to announce that they had charged Sydney and Tammy with the murder of Heather. The police claimed to have found evidence that led them to suspect that Sydney and Tammy had kidnapped and murdered Heather. In 2015, Sydney and Tammy were released from prison after 11 months, and their bond was set at $100,000 per person. During the bond hearing, prosecutors stated that there was no direct link between Sydney and Tammy and Heather's disappearance. The Sydney family claimed that they were threatened by the Elvis family, which led them to install a tracking system and advised them to avoid the Elvis family, including on social media. The murder charges were dismissed without prejudice in March 2016, which means the prosecution could choose to charge them with murder again if they wished to do so. The kidnapping charges were also reduced to pending, and the charges of indecent exposure against both of them were dropped. On June 20, 2016, Sydney's trial for the kidnapping of Heather began, and it was revealed in court that Heather was possibly pregnant. Detectives discovered that when Sydney went to Walmart, he purchased a pregnancy test and cigars. Afterward, Sydney went to a pay phone to call Heather and then to meet up with her. Sydney explained that the pregnancy test was for his wife Tammy because they were trying to have a child, even though the home security footage of Sydney's residence showed them washing their car after December 18th, burning rags, and having a receipt for a pregnancy test in their possession. Sydney was charged with kidnapping, but the first trial resulted in a mistrial because the jury could not reach a verdict. Despite the lack of abiding evidence that Sydney murdered Heather, 10 of the 12 jurors wanted to convict him, while the remaining 2 did not. In 2017, the Court of Appeals affirmed Sydney's conviction for kidnapping and attempted kidnapping of Heather and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. In October 2018, 5 years after Heather went missing, Tammy was put on trial for kidnapping and conspiracy. During the trial, it was revealed that Tammy was infuriated by her husband's affair with Heather, especially after rumors began to circulate that Heather was pregnant in December 2013. In addition, a family friend of the Sydney, named Donald DeMarino, testified that he saw an image of Heather on Tammy's phone during a family gathering that took place after Heather's disappearance. Donald mentioned that in the image, it appeared that Heather was unable to walk or speak. Allegedly, the image disturbed him so much that he withdrew from the meeting after seeing it. The image in question was not shown, nor were any further details provided. However, this testimony, along with all the other evidence presented by the prosecution, was sufficient to convince the jury to reach a guilty verdict in just under 2 hours. She was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison on both charges, and was eligible for parole after serving a specific amount of time. To this day, what happened to Heather Elvis that night in December 2013 has not been revealed. Both Sydney and Tammy have tried to appeal their convictions for years, insisting on their innocence, but without success. Currently, Sydney is incarcerated at the Lee Correctional Institution Maximum Security in Bishopville, with a projected release date of March 31, 2044. On the other hand, Tammy is in the Letcher Medium Security Correctional Center in Greenwood, with a projected release date of May 9, 2043. To this day, no trace of Heather Elvis has been found. A memorial garden was installed at Peachtree Boat Landing in her honor. Heather's disappearance has left an indelible void in the lives of her family and friends. The pain they have endured, the unanswered questions, and the longing for a resolution have become an enduring chapter in the history of Myrtle Beach. The Myrtle Beach community, united by the hope of obtaining answers, has come together in search efforts and vigils. Heather's story has echoed far beyond this coastal town, reflecting the challenges of navigating the complexities of love and relationships. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Blum family. Roger Blum was born on January 17, 1965, into a lively family with his parents and 7 siblings, 6 brothers and 1 sister. The family was not only large but also close-knit, instilling strong values and a sense of community. Even in high school, Roger was a diligent young man with future ambitions. He started driving his father's truck and, after finishing high school, worked in concrete transportation. Eventually, he realized his true passion was in sales, where he achieved success. His friends often said that he could sell ice to an Eskimo, which showed his amazing sales skills. This talent came with a generous, cheerful, and outgoing personality. He always seemed happy, and nothing pleased him more than making everyone around him smile. Roger had a good life and an excellent relationship with his family. The only thing missing was a partner, and one day he found that too. Although he did not elaborate, a close friend recounted that one evening, when he met a young woman who captivated him, Roger declared with complete determination that she was the woman he was going to marry. Melissa was born in Wichita on January 1, 1960. She grew up in a loving family with 3 girls and 3 boys, though sadly, a younger sister passed away before her first birthday. Melissa was a kind and diligent person, always willing to assist her family and others. She started her career as an accountant at a bank and built a successful path over the years. Her dedication, commitment, and teamwork earned her numerous promotions, eventually becoming vice president of the bank. In 1991, she met her soulmate, and they got married. Life appeared perfect for the Blum family. Melissa advances in her banking career, while Roger uses his confidence to start his own business. Roger enjoyed spending time with friends and spreading happiness. He found an ideal partner in Melissa. Both shared a strong sense of social responsibility, actively participating in charity, sports, and community events. Although, as we've seen in almost every story, a perfect life doesn't exist, for the Blum family, The only thing missing was a child to fill their loving home with laughter and joy. Unfortunately, this wish remained out of reach for the couple, and after years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive, Roger and Melissa began considering the idea of adopting a child. To fulfill their goal, they reached out to a local social worker and found out that a woman named Kisha Shaberg had put her 2 sons up for adoption. Her sons are Anthony, a 7-year-old whom everyone calls Tony, and Christopher, a 4-year-old known as Chris. Kisha wanted an open adoption, allowing her to keep in touch with her sons and the adoptive family. However, the Blum family preferred to adopt the children without maintaining those connections, aiming to provide a fresh start for them away from their difficult past. Roger and Melissa's plan finally worked, and from that moment on, Anthony and Christopher officially became part of the Blum family, starting to enjoy a life they never imagined. Emotional, Anthony was surprised to be able to have dinner every day. The kids adapted quickly and began to enjoy their new life. They attended elementary school and successfully completed that stage as good students. In high school, they also did well, had no issues with their peers, integrated completely, and formed a large group of friends. Plus, they excelled in sports, especially wrestling and football. Anthony quickly advanced in wrestling, earning 2nd place in a competition in his division. At that time, everything seemed to promise a bright future for the boys and a happy life for the whole family. However, the Blum family began to fall apart when Anthony was in his senior year of high school. The young man, who had previously behaved admirably, started to change. He became someone who frequently argued with his parents, claiming they always favored his younger brother, Christopher. He began drinking alcohol, ignored curfews, and even smoked marijuana. Life in the Blum household descended into chaos, and it soon appeared that any hope of the young man getting back on track was lost. For a long time, Anthony dreamed of joining the United States Air Force after high school, but his own actions ended that possibility. In 2013, he was arrested for an unspecified violent act and later, after graduation, for driving under the influence of alcohol. With these incidents on his record, a future in military aviation was no longer possible. Rather than reflecting on his situation, Anthony spiraled further downward. After graduating, his life lacked direction. He didn't want to study or work, all he wanted was to sleep late and spend his days in a haze of cannabis smoke. Melissa was terrified of the boy's angry outbursts, causing her to endure extremely difficult pressure. Adding to the complexity, there was something the Blum family was unaware of. Since the spring of 2013, Kisha has been in contact with her biological sons through social media. It appeared that Christopher either ignored Kisha's friend request or showed little interest in communicating with his biological mother. In contrast, Anthony promptly accepted the connection and was thrilled to reunite with his real mother. Kisha was heartbroken after giving her sons to the Blum family, but she found comfort in knowing they were both welcomed into a good home and would stay together. Despite this, she struggled with the lack of contact. Reconnecting with her eldest son filled her with joy, though she also felt deep resentment towards the Blum family, believing they had turned Christopher against her. However, this resentment was overshadowed by the happiness of reuniting with her firstborn. Moreover, when she heard about Anthony's issues with his adoptive parents, Kisha became hopeful about reuniting with him and quickly invited him to visit her. Meanwhile, at the adoptive family's house, instead of getting better, things were getting worse. The conflict reached a boiling point when one day, during one of his tantrums, Anthony punched a hole in the wall. This was a turning point for the Blum family. They could no longer risk their own safety or Christopher. After several unsuccessful attempts to stop the eldest son's behavior, Roger and Melissa made the tough decision to tell Anthony he had to leave the house. The young man initially wandered without purpose but soon realized he needed to support himself. He found some jobs at fast food restaurants and supplemented his small income by selling cannabis. Although he slept like a nomad, staying at various friends' houses, he fell in with a group of youths heavily involved in drug abuse. In the midst of these challenging circumstances, a glimmer of hope appeared when Kisha invited him to come live with her in California. Anthony eagerly accepted, and they reunited at Kisha's home in September 2013. He was accompanied by his best friend from high school, Bordon, who had dropped out in his junior year to dedicate himself to drug dealing. The two young men were excited because they hoped to get Kisha's support to start a large marijuana business in the area, as she was experienced in the drug trade. They even considered entering the medical cannabis market. In reality, the two young men ended up living in a small one-room apartment. It's easy to see how tensions arose, especially since Sean, Kisha's partner, worked 2 jobs and was the only one providing for 5 people. Kisha contributed only a portion of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Meanwhile, Kisha, Anthony, and Bordon spent their days using drugs, and Kisha's younger daughter was constantly exposed to this negative environment. At one point, things became unacceptable when Sean discovered that Anthony and Bordon were selling marijuana near their house. He informed them that their actions were unacceptable and dangerous for his as the property owner, and insisted they take their drugs elsewhere. Following this incident, Sean issued an ultimatum to all the house occupants: everyone must find a job or leave the apartment. Instead of urging people to change as he intended, his actions led them to form an alliance and express their indignation towards his. They decided to leave the apartment and stay at a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. However, this was not a viable solution because after those weeks, they lacked the income to continue paying for the hotel. Their need for money didn't lead them to consider honest work. Their first thought was to return to Kansas, likely because Anthony knew the drug trade there well. After nearly a day of traveling, the group chose to stop in Arizona and rest overnight at a hotel. During their stay, Anthony shared a disturbing idea with his companions. He planned to kill his adoptive parents to claim their inheritance. When they arrived in Wichita, they booked a hotel room for a month and focused on planning the details of the affair. The plan was straightforward. They needed to eliminate Roger and Melissa, collect the insurance money, sell their assets, and use the proceeds to start a larger-scale drug operation. Anthony believed that the family he had returned to could become wealthy by growing and selling marijuana. He even suggested the ideal day for the crime: Friday, November 15, 2013, when his brother Christopher would be away at a wrestling event. Anthony, a former star wrestler, had stayed connected with some team members and found out about Christopher's commitment that night. Anthony gradually developed a plan to invite Roger and Melissa out under the pretense of discussing and resolving previous issues. Meanwhile, Bordon would take Kisha to their home while it was empty so she could steal valuables. Anthony knows where his foster parents keep money for emergencies. The plan was to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, but from the start, the true intention was for Kisha to end Roger and Melissa's lives when they returned. Everyone initially supported the plan, but later, Bordon decided to withdraw. Although he didn't want to be directly involved, he agreed to help by obtaining the necessary guns. Instead, he suggested his friend Andrew, a former high school classmate, to serve as the driver for Kisha to reach the Blum residence. Bordon fulfilled his promise by acquiring 2 pistols from other criminals. It's important to note that there was never any plan to share the money with Andrew. He was promised $11,000 to act mainly as a driver and assist Kisha in the robbery. Ultimately, Kisha was to be in charge. In early November, Kisha shared a photo of herself with Anthony on social media, captioned, "A bond that cannot be broken." Finally, the anticipated day came, Friday, November 15, 2013. As Anthony had expected, his wonderful adoptive parents agreed to meet him without hesitation. The meeting went smoothly. Meanwhile, at the Blum residence, a different scene unfolded. As soon as Roger and Melissa left for the meeting, Kisha and Andrew broke into the house by forcing open the garage door. They began searching through the house, seizing small valuable items and cash that the couple had kept for emergencies. After completing the first phase of their plan, Kisha and Andrew hid near the secluded house, waiting for Roger and Melissa to return. Shortly after, they received a call from Anthony. Anthony told them that the meeting was over and that his foster parents had left him at a hotel before going home. They didn't have to wait long. When the Blum vehicle halted in front of the parking gate, two attackers emerged from hiding. Kisha quickly positioned herself next to Melissa, while Andrew targeted Roger to keep him still. Melissa, shocked, recognized Kisha as the mother of the children they had adopted over a decade ago to give them love, stability, and a better future. She could only exclaim, "Oh my God, Kisha," before a precise shot to her head caused her to collapse in her seat. Roger, utterly shocked, attempted to help his wife. At that moment, Kisha approached the window and aimed at Roger's head. She pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. She tried repeatedly to fire while Roger stood frozen beside his wife's lifeless body. Eventually, the gun went off, and Roger fell beside the woman who had been his life's greatest partner. After completing their deadly plan, Kisha and Andrew got into their vehicle and swiftly drove away. The Blum couple remained there until about 9:15 p.m. when Christopher returned from a meeting and discovered the horrific scene. He quickly called 911, saying he had just come home and found his parents nearly unconscious in their van. He explained that Roger was coughing and Melissa was nodding her head. Both had gunshot wounds to their heads. The dispatcher told him to perform resuscitation attempts while emergency services arrived a few minutes later to take over. Remarkably, the Blums were still alive, but in critical condition, so they were rushed to a hospital. When they got back to the hotel where they were staying, Kisha seemed to have a panic attack and said she just needed to use an illegal substance, which she did with the other guys. Additionally, around that time, Kisha disposed of the used weapon and a purse containing items she had stolen from the house, so they could be dumped in a nearby stream. Andrew threw the items into a pond in a nearby park. The next day, Anthony used the money he stole from his adoptive parents to start dealing marijuana, earning his first $100. Sadly, that same day, Melissa passed away at the age of 53 after a long battle. Anthony also visited his father in the hospital, unaware that he had been removed from both the Blum family will and their insurance policies some time earlier. As a result, the two terrible crimes were committed for nothing. In the days that followed, it was discovered that Andrew had not been paid and was unaware that Kisha had taken money from the Blum family's home. Eventually, they were caught. During the first inspections of the Blum residence, police noticed the garage door had been forced open and the home was in complete disarray with items scattered everywhere. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other items were stolen. Authorities initially thought the attack on the couple happened because they arrived while the thieves were still there. However, it was later determined that the fatal assault occurred before the couple entered the home, so this theory was dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, investigators found no significant fingerprints, but they did discover a casing. The authorities then focused on the victims' workplaces, suspecting a disgruntled client might have sought revenge, but this theory was dismissed. Next, they decided to speak with people close to the couple. Anthony was first on the detectives' list because he was the last person seen with the victims. However, he insisted he knew nothing about the incident and had not been involved. He claimed that after dinner, he returned directly to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. This was confirmed by the hotel staff. Christopher was second on the list of suspects because he had discovered the bodies. However, he was quickly cleared after confirming that he was at a dinner with the wrestling team during the incident. Despite this, investigators noticed something unusual about his behavior. He didn't seem very upset and appeared deep in thought. When the police asked him who he thought might be responsible for what happened to his parents, Christopher promptly mentioned one person. He said the only person who might have a grudge against his parents and possibly commit such an act was his older brother, Anthony. Thanks to this crucial tip, the authorities caught a lucky break in their search for the culprits. A man reached out to the police to say that a young guy, a friend of Anthony, had approached him wanting to buy a gun. The detectives focused their attention on this person, and upon checking his background, they found he had a long history connected to drugs. They also found out that he had traveled to California with Anthony. The guy in question was Bordon. Bordon soon received a message from his family letting him know that investigators from the sheriff's office wanted to question him about the incident involving the Blums. The next morning, Bordon went to the police station. A press report revealed that on his way there, he stopped by a pond to discard something, reportedly the guns used in the crime that hadn't been disposed of as intended. According to this report, he was already under surveillance, and when the police searched the water, they found a bag he had thrown in, containing a pistol that hadn't been fired during the attack. Bordon's interrogation lasted 3 days. Initially, he insisted he was not involved in the incident. However, under pressure from authorities, he eventually confessed everything he knew, explaining that the plan for the attack was Anthony's idea. Anthony Blum, 18, and his biological mother Kisha, 35, were arrested on November 19 at the hotel where they were staying. In addition, Andrew, who was also 18, was arrested, followed by Bordon's arrest on November 20, 2013. At that time, Kisha did not admit to being involved in the robbery and other crimes, even though the 3 young men confessed to what had happened. On November 25, 2013, the accused first appeared in court via video conference. During this appearance, they were all charged with the same offenses: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. The 3 young men were set a bail of $500,000, and for Kisha, the bail was set at $1 million. On December 21, Rogers passed away at the age of 48, joining his beloved Melissa. After his death, the situation worsened for the woman and the 3 young men, as they faced the risk of being charged with capital murder, which could lead to a death penalty sentence. On January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were officially charged with capital murder, accused of being responsible for the deaths of multiple people in the same incident. Additionally, Kisha was charged with 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing was held on July 17 of that year. By that time, Bordon had negotiated with the authorities and became the prosecution's star witness in exchange for a reduced sentence. After a year of negotiations, not only did Bordon reach an agreement, but 2 other individuals involved in the crime also negotiated with the prosecution. According to the agreements, the accused would not contest the charges against them and would waive their right to appeal their sentences. In return, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty and to drop some charges. Starting in mid-2015, each of them confirmed their decision to plead guilty in separate hearings. The judge sentenced Kisha to life in prison without parole for the capital murder charge and an additional 122 months for 2 counts of aggravated robbery. These sentences will be served consecutively. When given the chance to speak, she expressed deep regret for what happened and sympathized with the Blum family. However, the rest of her statement was controversial, as she claimed she was not involved in the incident and harbored no ill will towards the Blums. Instead, she expressed great respect for them, acknowledging that they had provided Anthony and Christopher with a wonderful life, for which she remained grateful. Official records indicate that Kisha is still held in a high-security correctional facility. The next to face his fate was his son, Anthony Blum, known to everyone as Tony, who received the same sentence as his mother. During the sentencing hearing, Anthony, who chose not to speak when given a chance, listen to the victim impact statement made by his aunt, Christina Blum. She thanked the authorities for delivering justice and spoke about all the love that Roger and Melissa had shown the boy. In complete silence, Anthony listened to Christina's heartfelt words, and at one point, tears almost welled up in the young accused's eyes. Ultimately, the woman informed Anthony that he had made his decisions voluntarily. She suggested that he might eventually understand his choices, or perhaps he never will. Since then, Anthony has been in a correctional facility. Up to now, his record includes numerous infractions, such as smuggling, fighting, unauthorized phone use, explicit sexual activity, theft, and disobedience, among others. A week after those trials, it was Andrew's turn, the only one who refused to admit his responsibility. He was found guilty of first and second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison plus 155 months. Finally, Bordon, the last person involved in the incident, who had made a plea deal with the prosecution from the start, was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 242 years in prison. According to his official record, Bordon will have his first chance to be released on May 28, 2035. However, his prison record shows he hasn't reformed, as he has received 71 disciplinary reports for disobedience, threatening others, using stimulants, drunkenness, possession of contraband tobacco, theft, and dangerous smuggling, among other reasons. Ultimately, the district attorney was satisfied with the case's outcome. Although Kisha had given up that option, she unsuccessfully tried to appeal her sentences. The undeniable fact at the conclusion of this story is that the lives of two wonderful people, Roger and Melissa Blum, ended in a tragic and needless way. The tragedy began with the bitterness or guilt of a woman who lived a life of excess and gave her children up for adoption. She couldn't handle the fact that one of her descendants no longer wanted contact with her. This seemingly caused her to misdirect her anger towards the people who had lovingly cared for her children. Anthony reacted to the couple's love and care with resentment, envy, and violence. He turned to substance abuse and eventually committed 2 crimes. Kisha's younger daughter was placed in foster care. On the other hand, Christopher Blum overcame the loss, the pain, and with the support of his family, he lived a positive life. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jason Corbett. Jason Corbett, a 39-year-old Irish businessman, Jason has a warm, friendly personality. Born in Limerick, Ireland, Jason has a twin brother named Wayne and an older sister named Tracy. He married Margaret Fitzpatrick in 2003 when he was 27. They later welcomed 2 children, a son named Jack and a daughter named Sarah, whom they loved dearly. Jason's family seemed to be living a happy life in Ireland, but this happiness was short-lived. Tragedy struck in 2006, shortly after Sarah was born. Margaret suffered a severe asthma attack one night, waking Jason up because she was having trouble breathing. Jason immediately tried to help her by giving her medication and using her inhaler, but her condition quickly worsened. In a panic, Jason called an ambulance, but unfortunately, Margaret died on the way to the hospital. Jason Corbett was the director of a small packaging company in Ireland when he lost his wife, leaving him to raise his 2-year-old son and 3-month-old daughter alone. His friends witnessed his deep sadness and struggled to cope with the loss. A year after his wife's death, Jason was looking for a nanny and housekeeper to care for his children. This led him to Molly Martins, a 25-year-old American woman. In March 2008, Molly moved from the United States to Ireland to take up a nanny job. A friend of Jason's accompanied him to the airport to pick Molly up. The friend immediately became concerned that Molly might not be suitable for the job. Molly's youthful appearance, flashy style, and heavy makeup aroused suspicion. With her bright jacket, cowboy boots, curly hair, and heavy makeup, Molly looks more like a stage performer than a responsible nanny and maid. Molly was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee. After attending Clemson University for a while, she dropped out and decided to start a new life in Ireland. There, she worked as a nanny for Jason's family, taking care of his 2 children, Jack and Sarah. Molly immediately took to the children, showing them care and concern. Jason's friends noticed a significant change in him. He seemed to be coming back to life after a period of grief. As Molly and Jason's relationship deepened, love blossomed and they began dating. The family of 4 went on vacations together, which brought them closer together. They began to plan for their future as a family. 2 years later, on Valentine's Day 2010, Jason took Molly to a coffee shop, where he proposed to her with a ring. Overjoyed, Molly immediately began planning their wedding in the United States. She also convinced Jason to leave Ireland and move to the United States with her, and he agreed. In 2011, Jason sold his house, moved to the United States for work, and the family settled in Davidson County, North Carolina. The couple married in a beautiful ceremony attended by friends and family from both the United States and Ireland. After the wedding, Molly worked as a swimming instructor. But her main focus was raising Jack and Sarah. Jason, on the other hand, worked as a manager in the United States. At first, their life seemed perfect, but as time went on, their marriage began to fall apart. On August 1, 2015, Molly's parents, Tom and Sharon Martins, visited Jason's family home, where he greeted them at the entrance and helped them with their luggage. Tom had brought a gift for Jason's son, Jack, a baseball bat, but Jack was out with friends at the time. Instead, Jason, Molly, her parents, and Sarah had dinner together, eating pizza. Jack returned home late that night, but Tom decided to wait until the next morning to give him the baseball bat. After 11 p.m., the family went to bed. Molly and Jason were in the master bedroom on the first floor, while their children, Jack and Sarah, were in nearby rooms. Molly's parents were upstairs in the living room. Hours later, at 3 a.m., Molly's father, Tom, called 911 in a panic. He claimed that Jason had attacked his daughter, Molly, and in response, Tom had hit Jason with a baseball bat. Jason was now unconscious and bleeding. During the call, Tom expressed his fear that Jason's severe head injuries could be fatal and urgently requested an ambulance to their location. Tom asked the 911 operator for help, and she instructed Tom and Molly to perform CPR to try to revive Jason until paramedics arrived. When the police and ambulance arrived, they found Molly in the yard near a car, looking distressed and shocked but not crying. Inside the house, they discovered Jason Corbett's body in the master bedroom, surrounded by blood splattered on the bed, walls, and floor. Tom and Molly both had blood on their clothes. A baseball bat and a large pebble with blood on them were found near Jason, along with an overturned lamp. Jack and Sarah had been sleeping in their room during the incident. At the police station, Tom Martins, 66, a 30-year veteran of the FBI, stated that his son-in-law was mentally unstable and had been abusing his daughter. According to Tom, Jason had been drunk that night. Everyone had gone to bed, but Tom was awakened in the middle of the night by screams and loud voices coming from downstairs. He quickly got out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat, and ran down the stairs. When Tom entered the master bedroom, he found Jason strangling Molly with both hands. Tom yelled, "Let her go." In response, Jason turned to him and said, "I'm going to kill her." Tom and Molly did not deny their involvement in Jason's death but claimed they had acted in self-defense. Tom immediately felt the need to protect himself and those around him. He swung the baseball bat at Jason, but the blow seemed to have no effect. When Jason tried to drag Molly into the bathroom, Tom intervened, trying to stop him. The situation worsened when Jason pushed Tom, causing him to fall and his glasses to fly off. At this point, Tom felt his life was in danger. Jason then spotted the baseball bat on the floor and reached for it. Molly quickly responded by grabbing a rock and hitting Jason in the head, yelling, "Don't touch my dad," as she did so. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Tom picked up the baseball bat and repeatedly hit Jason until he fell to the floor. Molly, 32, provided a consistent account of events during her interview. She explained that her daughter Sarah woke up with a nightmare that night, which caused Jason to become angry and attack her. Jason allegedly began strangling Molly, threatening to kill her, and her father intervened to protect her. In order to protect her father, Molly claimed to have hit Jason on the head with a heavy rock. When asked where she got the rock, Molly replied that she had placed it on her bedside table. The rock had originally been used for drawing pictures with children as part of a gardening project, but Molly could not remember exactly how many times she had hit Jason, describing the incident as a desperate fight for her life. During her interview, Molly told police that she was still in pain from the alleged strangling incident. Photos of Molly, which showed a red mark in the middle of her neck, were compared to photos taken of her when she was arrested. However, the comparison did not reveal any red marks on her neck at the time of her arrest. Molly later admitted that the fight with her husband had actually occurred the day before the tragedy, in which Jason had grabbed her arm and neck. During questioning, she repeatedly complained of a sore throat. Both Molly and her father, Tom, testified that Jason had abused his wife, but Jason's family disputed these claims. Jason's sister, Tracy, noticed that Molly was controlling of Jason, often becoming upset if things did not go her way. She also noticed that Molly did not want to socialize with Jason's family members when they visited. Additionally, one of Molly's friends shared a disturbing claim that Molly had claimed to be friends with Jason's first wife, Margaret, until her death. However, this contradicted the family's account, as they knew Margaret had died of an asthma attack, not cancer. Despite Jason's relatives' warnings and attempts to intervene about Molly's unusual behavior, the wedding still takes place, marking the beginning of a complicated and troubled marriage. Over time, Molly's behavior began to raise concerns. Jason noticed a major change in her personality and suspected that she might have mental health issues. She was initially kind and loving, but now seemed manipulative and controlling. This worried Jason and led to more problems in their relationship. Molly began distancing herself from Jason's family by cutting her phone calls to just seconds. Before her death, Jason took steps to protect his children, Jack and Sarah. He named his sister, Tracy, as their legal guardian in case anything happened to him. Tracy knew that if Jason died, Molly would have custody of the children. After Jason's death, Tracy traveled to North Carolina to file for custody, preparing for a legal battle with Molly. During her troubled marriage to Jason, Molly consulted with an attorney to understand her rights to Jason's children in the event of a divorce. The lawyer suggested that she record their arguments and gather evidence that could be used against Jason. As a result, Molly began secretly recording their conversations. In these recordings, Molly appeared unresponsive, often ignoring Jason's repeated questions as his voice grew louder. After Jason's death, Molly confided in a close friend about her marital problems, describing Jason as controlling and abusive. She accused him of forcing her to have sex, verbally abusing her, and becoming increasingly aggressive toward her over time. Despite this, Molly never reported Jason's behavior to the police. For days after Jason's death, his 10-year-old son Jack and 8-year-old daughter Sarah were interviewed by a child welfare specialist. During the conversation, they shared their thoughts about their parents' relationship. The children described seeing their mother, Molly, being careful not to wake their father, Jason, for fear of him getting angry. Jack described a pebble on his parents' bedside table, explaining that they had brought it in because it was raining and planned to decorate it later. Both Jack and Sarah described witnessing arguments between them. According to the children, their father, Jason, often initiated these arguments, which included hitting, pushing, and swearing at his mother, Molly, over trivial matters. Jason's autopsy report found that he died of traumatic brain injury. He had suffered approximately 12 severe blows to the head with a baseball bat and a rock, all concentrated in the same area. The injuries were so severe that his scalp was torn away from his skull and his skull was fractured. A toxicology report found that Jason's blood alcohol level was slightly higher than normal at the time of his death. He also had traces of trazodone, an antidepressant commonly prescribed to treat insomnia, in his body. Jason was buried in his hometown of Limerick, Ireland, next to his first wife, Margaret. After Jason's death, his sister, Tracy, took their children, Jack and Sarah, to Ireland, which left Molly shocked and heartbroken. She tried to contact Jack and Sarah by phone and social media. Molly and Tom claimed they acted in self-defense against Jason, but the investigation into his death continues. Tracy has another theory. She thinks Molly killed Jason because he planned to leave her and take their children. Tracy believes that Jason told Molly about his decision on the night of the incident, and Molly, afraid of being alone, reacted violently. In Ireland, Jack and Sarah slowly adjust to their new lives. 9 months after their father's death, they revealed that they were forced to lie about domestic violence. They admit that Molly made up stories about their father's violent behavior, threatening to cut them off if they did not comply. The children clarify that their father had never abused Molly, contrary to what they had initially said. During the investigation, Molly's past relationship with her ex-husband Keith Megan came to light. Keith shared some revealing details about Molly's past. The two met on a dating website and quickly fell in love, moving in together just 6 weeks later. Keith described Molly as independent, fun-loving, carefree and unconventional. However, she eventually confided in him about her struggles with bipolar disorder. Keith was not overly concerned by the revelation, as Molly was on medication and appeared to be fine, apart from occasional changes in her behavior when she missed a dose. These changes did not manifest as violence or outbursts, but rather as clingy behavior during arguments, such as refusing to let Keith leave. Additionally, Molly would often spend hours in the bath, followed by periods of sitting on the cold floor and crying. Despite the difficulties they faced, Keith and Molly continued their life together and decided not to have children at that time. However, Molly soon revealed that she was pregnant, which took Keith by surprise. As the sole breadwinner, Keith was struggling financially and did not feel ready to become a father. Keith eventually proposed to Molly and she happily accepted, but due to her health problems, Molly continued to take prescription medication, including antidepressants, sometimes up to 16 pills a day. This caused Keith to worry about the effects of the medication on their unborn child. In a tragic turn of events, Molly had a dream that she had lost her baby, and the next day the hospital confirmed that the fetus had died. The loss put further strain on their relationship. Molly fell into a state of grief and was diagnosed with major depression. Her parents began to view Keith negatively, seeing him as the cause of Molly's problems. Molly planned to leave Keith in the United States to find work as a nanny for the family in Europe. In March 2008, she packed her things and moved out of the apartment they were sharing. 10 days later, she called Keith, telling him that she was in Ireland, had found a job, and was doing well. This was the last time they spoke. Years later, in October 2015, Keith received an email from a police officer in North Carolina revealing that Molly had kept her relationship with Keith and her move to Europe a secret. The email informed Keith that Molly's new husband, Jason Corbett, had been murdered. When Keith watched an interview with Molly and her father, Tom, they described Jason as a cruel person, but Keith did not believe their story. He thought their feelings seemed fake. In January 2016, Tom and Molly were charged with second-degree murder in Jason's death. At their trial in July 2017, Tom and Molly claimed they had acted in self-defense when they killed Jason. Tom said he had tried everything he could to keep himself and Molly safe. Tom admitted to beating Jason with a baseball bat, only stopping when he was sure Jason was no longer a threat. However, the prosecution argued that the severity of the attack showed a deep hatred for Jason rather than self-defense. Analysis of the bloodstains showed that some of the blows were delivered when Jason's head was between 30 and 50 centimeters above the ground, suggesting that Tom continued to attack even after Jason was no longer a threat. The presence of stains on Molly's nightgown near the area where Jason was struck suggests that she was nearby during the attack. During the trial, Lieutenant Frank Young testified about the injuries he observed on Tom and Molly on the night of the incident. He stated that Molly had self-inflicted wounds to her neck, telling her to stop while he was taking notes on her injuries. Other than some dried blood on her face and hair, Lieutenant Young found no other injuries on Molly. Tom also had no injuries, only blood on his watch and under his fingernails. Notably, his glasses were not broken. Paramedic Amanda Hackworth also took the stand and described what she found when she arrived at the scene. When she examined Jason's body, she found that his torso was cold to the touch and had patches of dried blood. This contradicts Molly's statement that they called 911 immediately after Jason became unconscious. The police investigation discovered that Jason had a life insurance policy, with Molly listed as the beneficiary. Furthermore, it was revealed that Jason had financially supported Molly's parents. A neighbor of Jason's family testified at the trial. He recalled spending an evening with Jason from 3:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., drinking beer together. According to the neighbor, Jason seemed very relaxed at the time. The neighbor also witnessed Tom and his wife arriving at Jason's house and noted that Jason warmly welcomed them and helped them carry heavy luggage into the house. After 9 days of witness testimony, listening to arguments, and viewing haunting crime scene photos, the jury reached a verdict within 3 hours. The court found Molly Corbett and her father, Tom Martins, guilty of second-degree murder. Molly was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while her father was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As the verdict was read, Molly turned to her mother, expressing remorse. "Hey detectives. Welcome back, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Dishon." Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, USA. It was a quiet place where many residents made their living from farming and were very close to one another. Jessica had 2 younger brothers, Christopher and Michael. From a young age, she helped her parents, Mike and Edna, take care of them while they were at work. This made Jessica more independent, and her parents could always count on her. When she was 15, she started working part-time at a local restaurant, saving money to buy her first car. She dreamed of owning a red Pontiac, and after a few years, she had saved enough money to make this dream come true. Despite her part-time job, Jessica still achieved very good academic results and began planning to go to college to become an accountant. In the fall of 1999, when Jessica was 17, she entered her senior year and started dating a boy, which made her very excited. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, as usual, Jessica's parents went to work while she was still sleeping, and her younger brothers went to the bus stop and then to school. Jessica stayed home and was supposed to drive to school by herself. However, right after her brothers left, around noon, her mother, Edna, returned home and immediately noticed something strange. Jessica's car was parked in front of the house, even though she was supposed to be in class at that time. Edna went to Jessica's room, guessing that she might have overslept and not gone to school. However, Jessica was not in her bedroom. Edna then thought that, for some reason, Jessica might have asked her father, Mike, to drive her to school. She immediately called Mike, but he said he had gone to work alone that morning. Edna suspected that there was a problem with Jessica's car, so she took the spare key to try to start it. However, as she approached the car, she noticed a few disturbing things. The driver's door was slightly open. Jessica's cell phone was on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, and under the front seat were a pair of shoes and her keys. In the back seat were her textbooks, work clothes, and purse. Edna immediately worried that the worst could have happened. It was clear that someone had tried to call 911 from Jessica's phone but couldn't get through. Furthermore, Jessica couldn't have left all her belongings in the car and left unexpectedly. Her family lived in the suburbs, so she would have had to walk several miles. Jessica's parents called the school and learned that she had missed class. However, the school did not notify them as they should have. A few hours later, Jessica's best friend from the place where they both worked called her parents, saying that Jessica had not shown up for her shift, which made them even more worried. Worried about Jessica's absence from school and work, as well as her belongings, including her phone with the 9 and 1 dial displayed being left in an unlocked car, her parents decided to call the police. However, the sheriff simply assumed that Jessica might have wandered off and would eventually return home. He did not notice that one of her shoes was left in the car, making it difficult for her to travel far without it. Jessica's parents tried to convince the sheriff that their daughter might be in danger, but despite their pleas, he refused to open an investigation, leaving them with no choice but to return home. After that, her parents took it upon themselves to search for her and contact acquaintances, but no one had any information about her. The next day, her parents returned to the sheriff and reported that Jessica had not returned home. This time, the police went to check Jessica's car but found another problem. The officers had searched the car without gloves, touching everything inside with their bare hands. They also did not follow standard procedure for checking Jessica's room. Jessica's parents, once again frustrated with the lack of professionalism from law enforcement, so sought the help of local media to draw attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of concern. Together with relatives and friends, they searched on their own and distributed flyers with information about Jessica. The search was led by Jessica's father and his brother, who were familiar with the area. Fearing the worst, they decided to search near a local river. The area had a bad reputation as it was dense, isolated, and popular with drug dealers and other criminals. For hours, Jessica's relatives searched the difficult terrain along the river but found no trace of her. The next morning, something unusual happened. Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, the boy ran into the house, saying he heard a cry for help that sounded like his sister's. Jessica's father immediately grabbed the shotgun and ran outside to find the source of the cry. At the same time, his brother drove up to the house to join the search. Not long after, they noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, a 40-year-old man named David Brooks. When they approached, they saw him burning something on the ground, which looked very suspicious. Jessica's father asked David for permission to search his farm. However, David refused and asked them to leave. It was not just David's strange behavior that was noteworthy. Before Jessica's disappearance, her family had maintained a normal relationship with David and his family. However, after Jessica went missing, David began to act strangely. He often drove slowly past Jessica's family's house and stared at them with a disturbing expression. Additionally, Jessica's parents received strange phone calls from a man who only panted without saying anything. Jessica's family suspected David might have had something to do with their daughter's disappearance, but they could not understand why he was behaving so oddly. Jessica's parents decided to contact the police again, despite having previously failed to get significant attention from the agency. They shared their observations, urged the officers to search David's property with dogs, and agreed to use Jessica's clothes to search for clues. The dogs led them to a fire pit on David's property, but they found no significant evidence. However, they did discover a pair of black gloves in one of the sheds, which indicated the presence of an odor associated with decomposition. Despite David's suspicious behavior, the police were still unable to connect him to Jessica's disappearance, and once again, they came up empty-handed. Frustrated with the local police, Jessica's father decided to contact the FBI. While the FBI typically did not investigate if only based on calls from relatives of missing persons, they decided to get involved immediately due to the disturbing facts presented by Jessica's parents. After a careful investigation, the FBI concluded that something truly terrible might have happened to Jessica. From this point on, a real investigation began, one that the local police had been reluctant to conduct. FBI agents collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and car, seized all potential evidence for analysis, and sent it to the lab. They also organized an extensive ground search using helicopters and gathered volunteers. Additionally, they thoroughly examined the bottom of the pond near Jessica's house, considering the possibility that her body might be there. FBI agents conducted a thorough search of David's farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. After this discovery, detectives were almost certain that David was involved in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, because he acted strangely while police were searching his property. Although investigators did not find enough evidence to arrest the brothers, they focused their efforts on thoroughly searching the area, as it was becoming increasingly likely that Jessica was no longer alive. On September 27, 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call from a woman driving along the road near where Jessica's father had been searching for her. The woman had seen a strange object near a tree on the side of the road and decided to check it out. The woman was shocked to discover it was a body. She immediately called the police. The FBI arrived at the scene and confirmed that the body was that of a young woman who was missing several fingers and toes. She had been bound with a rope that had traces of red and silver paint on her feet, and some of her clothing was also missing, suggesting that she had been sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, the state of decomposition of the body made it difficult to identify the victim. The police went to Jessica's home and asked her parents to assist in the identification process. Jessica's father was unable to look directly at body, but her mother agreed to do so. When she arrived at the scene, Edna initially could not identify her. However, Edna later noticed a small butterfly tattoo on the body that was identical to her daughter's and located in the same spot. Medical professionals later confirmed the deceased's identity as Jessica Dishon and determined that her cause of death was strangulation. Several bruises were also found on her body. The autopsy revealed that she had been alive for about 3 days after her disappearance, as her legs, arms, and fingers were still intact. This indicated that the police had a chance to save her, but they did not take any action to do so. After Jessica's body was discovered, the FBI decided to re-interview David. In the first interview, David claimed to have seen Jessica near her home on the morning she went missing. However, in a subsequent interview, he changed his story, stating that he had not seen her at all that day. He then claimed that he had been home in bed with his wife that morning. When detectives questioned David's wife, she contradicted his account. The FBI continued to question David, asking him what he would do if they found his fingerprints on the victim's body, even though no such evidence was discovered. David's response was suspicious. He said he would have to confess everything in that case. He subsequently failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed with trial. Although no solid evidence linked David to the murder, there were troubling circumstantial signs of his involvement, and the likelihood of a guilty verdict remained relatively low. Investigators continued to seek additional evidence as they prepared for trial. They recalled finding a rope similar to the one used to bind the victim's legs during a search of David's car. However, no DNA was found on it, making it an inconclusive piece of evidence. The trial began in January 2003, and David's attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to convict his client. During the investigation, authorities discovered several missing body parts of the victim near the scene. They placed the parts in special containers and turned them over to local police, provide the requirement to keep them in a refrigerator. However, they left the containers at room temperature, which caused the parts to decompose quickly. Because the DNA and other evidence against David were not strong enough and the jury could not reach a unanimous decision, he was released. Under state law, he could only be charged again if new evidence was found. For Jessica's parents, this was a devastating blow. They were almost certain that David was the culprit behind their daughter's death. Furthermore, if the police had taken their job more seriously, their daughter might have been saved. Ultimately, they lost all hope for justice. In the years that followed, the case remained unsolved and gradually faded from memory. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department. She was assigned to investigate cold cases, initially focusing on the murder of Jessica Dishon. When she reviewed the case files, she was shocked by the negligence of her predecessors. Most of the documents were filled with errors, lacked references to conversations with interested parties, and the evidence was not properly documented. The case had been handled so inefficiently that she had to start the investigation from scratch, although already 13 years after the murder. Lynn's first step was to contact Jessica's family. One of Jessica's brothers, now grown and living on his own, gave Lynn a box of Jessica's belongings that had been taken from her car. He had kept it since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn was once again confronted with her colleagues' poor handling of evidence, as it had not been properly stored. Although, after all these years, these items were unlikely to help her, she persisted in examining everything she could find. Through her research, she discovered information about David's medical examination results, which showed that his IQ was only 61, extremely low. This raised concerns about police operations, particularly regarding the questioning of him. Based on his significantly low IQ, he may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. This could indicate that he may not have been involved in a case, as his unusual behavior could be explained by his extremely low IQ. After a thorough investigation of everyone involved or living near the scene, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death, a colleague from another department called Lynn and shared new information from an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know the true identity of Jessica's killer. Lynn approached this lead with skepticism because, many times, when inmates try to provide information to the police, the end result is often frustration and wasted time. Many of them make up stories in hopes of getting released early or improving their prison conditions. However, she understood that this lead could not be ignored without verification. She visited the prison and met a man who was said to have relevant information. According to the man, he had shared a cell with a convicted child molester, the same crime as him. They became friends and exchanged details about their crimes. One day, the inmate told him that he had killed Jessica. The informant then revealing the man's name. It was Stanley Dish, Jessica's uncle and her father's younger brother. According to the informant, Stanley had confessed that he had sexually abused Jessica for years while they lived in the same household. Stanley had threatened to kill Jessica or her relatives if she spoke out. In the spring of 1999, when Jessica had a boyfriend, Stanley began to fear that she would eventually reveal her abuse by him. On the morning of September 10th, Stanley went to Jessica's home while she was alone. Jessica was getting into her car to leave when Stanley asked her to break up with her boyfriend. Jessica refused and threatened to report him if he did not leave her alone. When he refused, Stanley began to threaten Jessica. She tried to call 911, but Stanley grabbed her. Eventually, Jessica broke free and ran into the house. Stanley chased her down, beat her, then tied her up with bed sheets and took her to a nearby abandoned warehouse, where she was later found dead. Stanley held her captive for a long time, torturing and mentally abusing her before killing her. He then moved her body to a visible location near the road and buried it beneath the warehouse. He also claimed that after the murder, he had dismembered some of her body parts, hoping to deceive the police into thinking it was a drug deal gone wrong. Detective Lynn realized that information about the dismembered body parts had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest friends knew about it, so the informant could not have made this up. Finally, the man added that Stanley had buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Lynn decided to verify all this information by searching for evidence. However, the local police station was short-staffed, so no one there could help her. She contacted Jessica's brother and a few other relatives, who agreed to join the search. She didn't tell them that Stanley might be the killer because she wanted to find some evidence to support these shocking accusations first. On the first day, they didn't find any clues in the heavy rain. They dug in areas that matched the description, but to no avail. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn returned to the scene. On the way, he showed her an abandoned shed on the side of the road. They went there and started digging inside, and almost immediately found a significant breakthrough. They discovered a buried bedsheet. Lynn collected this evidence and quickly went to Jessica's house. Over the years, Jessica's room had been kept exactly as it had been when her missing. Thanks to this, Lynn was able to confirm that the bedsheet found was part of Jessica's bedding, as it was not on the bed, and the other linens had the same pattern. Shortly after the evidence was discovered, Stanley was arrested and questioned. Although he appeared very nervous during the interrogation, he still refused to admit to the crime. He was eventually charged with murder, and the case went to trial. Jessica's father, Mike, could not believe that his own brother would commit such a cruel act against his daughter. He went through a period of complete denial but eventually accepted this unbearable truth. He recalled that in the early days of Jessica's disappearance, it was Stanley who suggested searching for the body near the riverbank. However, during the search, he suddenly felt nauseous and was taken home by his brother. It turned out that this incident occurred just a few hundred meters from the warehouse where Jessica lived, suggesting that Stanley had deliberately distracted them from searching for her while she was still alive. During the preparation for the trial, Detective Lynn carefully researched Stanley's past. She discovered that he had a previous conviction for assaulting another girl in the family. In addition, several other women reported that he had sexually abused them when they were children. He often took advantage of his relationship to stay at the victims' homes, then committed the crimes by threatening them not to speak out. The police concluded that he had committed these acts over a period of 3 decades. However, Detective Lynn found that securing a murder conviction would be difficult due to the lack of direct evidence such as fingerprints or DNA. She dug deeper into the case and stumbled upon an old box of files that had not been examined. When she looked through the contents, she was shocked again by the incompetence of those who had originally handled the case. The box contained a letter dated June 26, 2002, in which another informant had written to the police with the same story that Lynn had only heard 12 years later from a Kentucky inmate. In the summer of 2002, Stanley had been convicted of assaulting an underage relative. During that time, he had told a fellow inmate, who happened to be a police informant, about killing Jessica. The fellow inmate had written a letter to the department handling the case, revealing the gruesome details of what Stanley had done to his niece. The police simply ignored the letter and, perhaps believing that David had been involved all those years ago, did not consider other suspects. Lynn was frustrated by the lack of professionalism from her colleagues. Had they paid more attention to their work, the case might have been solved in 2002. For years, Jessica's family could only wait for the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally face the justice that had been delayed for his actions. The case began in 2015, and Stanley proclaimed his innocence. In court, Jessica's parents could barely look at the relative who had destroyed their lives. They were also furious that he would not admit to his actions to help them gain closure. The prosecution was concerned that the chances of securing a conviction for murder were slim, mainly due to the lack of substantial evidence. They were also worried about the charges of assault against the other girls in the family, as these witnesses would have to come to court and describe Stanley's behavior toward them in detail. To clarify, the prosecutor negotiated a plea deal with Stanley. Under the terms of the deal, the death penalty would be waived if Stanley pleaded guilty to the assault on his relative and to Jessica's murder. Stanley agreed to the deal, however. Part of the agreement stipulated that he did not have to reveal any further details about the crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy about this, as they wanted to know the whole truth. In the end, Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Stanley was sentenced at the age of 56 and could have been released at the age of 71. After the trial, Jessica's father stated that if his brother hadn't died in prison, he would have waited for him to figure things out for himself. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview and insisted that he did not kill Jessica. He claimed he was on his way to work that morning, but 2 decades later, he couldn't prove it. He could not explain why 2 independent informants had similar stories, including details only the killer would know, such as where the bedsheets were buried. David Brooks stated that police had not ruled out his involvement in the case. Stanley, who knew him, may have asked for his help in disposing of the victim's belongings. Due to his low IQ, Brooks may not have understood the full extent of the situation. It is possible that he burned Jessica's clothes in a fire, and that Stanley gave him gloves that had a scent detectable by dogs. However, the truth may never be revealed, as Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart problems. On the 3rd day after Jessica went missing, her younger brother heard screams outside and thought it was his sister calling for help. However, it is impossible to say for certain what happened at that time. Jessica could still be alive, but Stanley might have kept her in a shed a few miles from her home. In this case, it is more likely that the child imagined the incident due to stress or that someone else was screaming. However, there is another theory, although it seems unlikely. We know that shortly after Jessica's father rushed out, Stanley drove up to the house, which indicates he was nearby. Therefore, it is possible that the girl was in his car with her mouth covered or unconscious. In spite of this hypothesis appears very unlikely. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Candi Rogers. Candice Rogers, also known as Candi, was born on July 18, 1948 was either. After her birth, her parents divorced, but her father remained in the same city, allowing Candi to spend time with him regularly. As a child, she enjoyed the outdoors, often going for walks and playing with her dog. She also dreamed of joining the Campfire Girls, a girls-only organization similar to the Boy Scouts. In 1959, Candi joined the Campfire Girls at the age of 9. One of the organization's activities was selling mints door-to-door. On Friday, March 6th, she planned to sell mints after school. After returning home, having dinner, and playing with her dog. Then she took about 8 boxes of mints and headed out. Candi had planned to walk around her neighborhood and sell sweets to the people living nearby. To ensure that the other girls selling sweets in the area didn't overlap, each girl was assigned specific streets to visit. However, when Candi failed to return home by her expected time of 6 p.m., her mom started to worry. Candi's mom and grandfather set out to search for her, but they couldn't find her anywhere in the neighborhood. As darkness fell, the search party grew, with family, friends and neighbors joining in to help. Despite their combined efforts, they were unable to find any sign of Candi. Convinced that something was wrong, Candi's mom decided to call the police. As the police joined the search, they began by questioning the neighbors. Their investigation revealed that she had only made one sale, suggesting that something may have happened to her soon after she left home. A witness reported seeing Candi on a nearby street around 6:30 p.m., which seemed unusual since her mother was already searching for her by then. Candi's grandfather reported some unusual incidents after going to search for his granddaughter. On the same street where a witness last saw Candi, he nearly got hit by a speeding green 1956 Ford. Although the police distributed the car's description, they were unable to locate it due to the lack of a license plate number. Later, at around 9 p.m., several mint boxes belonging to Candi were found along the road near a bridge, increasing the concern for her safety. The police intensified their search in this area, combing the riverbanks and a nearby wooded zone throughout the night. Unfortunately, Candi was not found. As news of Candi's disappearance spread, local newspapers covered the story, and it eventually gained statewide media attention. In 1959, child disappearances near their homes were extremely rare, making Candi's case even more disturbing. The residents of her town had not experienced a similar incident in many years, leaving them deeply shaken and concerned. The next morning, police increased their search by deploying more personnel and resources, including mounted police, off-road vehicles, and military members. A large number of volunteers from the city and surrounding areas joined the search, swelling the total number of search to over 1,000 people. This made it one of the largest searches in the country's history at the time. The search area was expanded to 11 miles around Candi's home, but despite this, no signs of her were found. Tragically, on the same day, a search helicopter clipped power lines and crashed, claiming the lives of 3 of its 5 crew members. Undeterred, the search efforts continued for many days, but yielded no results. Police officers worked tirelessly in multiple day and night to try and locate Candi. Investigators also followed up on approximately 750 tips received in the early days of the search, but unfortunately, every lead ended in a dead end. 15 days after Candi went missing, 2 military personnel on a hunting trip in the woods west of Spokane stumbled upon children's shoes on the ground. Recognizing the shoes as possibly belonging to Candi, they immediately reported their discovery to the police. The shoes were confirmed by Candi's grandfather. He said they were indeed hers. After discovering this clue, police conducted a search of the woods and they quickly found Candi's body, partially hidden in the underbrush and covered with pine branches. A medical examination revealed that the cause of death was strangulation, using a torn piece of fabric from Candi's own skirt. Injuries on Candi's hands and feet suggested that she had been tied up, although no ropes were found near. The police investigation showed that Candi had been sexually abused. During their search of the crime scene, the police discovered a green car seat cover nearby, although they were unable to establish if it was linked to the murder. A small, purple stain was also found on Candi's clothing, which gave off a strong scent of grape-flavored chewing gum. Despite all efforts, the police still could not find relevance between this stain and the case. With limited clues, police searched for any clues that might help them find the killer. They thoroughly investigated numerous tips and looked into the potential involvement of hundreds of people. This group included neighbors, people of interest, and previously convicted individuals. However, the investigation eventually narrowed down to focus on one particular suspect, Alfred Braves, a 50-year-old man. The reason Alfred became a suspect because, on the same day Candi's body was found, he died in his car, near where Candi's boxes of mints were found. Additionally, Alfred lived near Candi's home. Upon finding his body, police discovered a rope and a strand of hair that was not Alfred's, which belonged to a woman. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Alfred's home. Upon searching his house, they discovered numerous newspaper articles detailing sex crimes against women and girls. The police also found that several women had accused him of harassment, and even his own wife had suspicions about his involvement in Candi's murder. However, despite the suspicious circumstances, the police were unable to find any concrete evidence that directly linked Alfred to the crime, and investigators were hesitant to clear him of suspicion. In the face of a lack of evidence, detectives shifted their focus to other suspects. Over several months, the police diligently investigated each person, but every lead turned out to be a dead end. Later, investigators found another suspect, a serial killer named Hugh Morse. He was arrested in 1961 for a string of crimes. The important evidence that Hugh was involved in Candi's case was that he had a habit of chewing grape-flavored gum, which was similar to a substance found on Candi's clothes. Furthermore, additionally, he had committed 2 murders in Spokane a few months after Candi's death, further increasing the suspicion of his involvement in the crime. Hugh began committing crimes quite early. His first arrest was for assaulting a woman, but the penalty was lenient. He was merely discharged from the army. He then went on to commit multiple robberies in Los Angeles and served only a 6-month sentence. After being released, Hugh tricked 2 8-year-old girls into going with him to a secluded area by promising them ice cream. He then sexually assaulted them. This crime led to his arrest. However, instead of going to prison, a medical commission determined that he was a sexual psychopath. As a result, he was placed in a mental health facility for a period of 2 years to receive treatment. After his release, doctors thought Hugh had fully recovered. He then moved to Spokane, where he began peeping into women's windows. His actions took a more severe turn in November 1959, when he broke into the home of a 28-year-old woman and acted violently, ultimately killing her. 10 months later, Hugh entered the residence of a 69-year-old woman, repeating the same crimes as before. A month after that, he assaulted another woman, stabbing her multiple times. Although she sustained severe injuries, she managed to survive the attack. After escaping the city, he continued a devastating crime spree over several months, brutally attacking and sexually assaulting numerous women and girls with a knife, ultimately claiming the lives of 2 more victims. To evade capture, Hugh constantly moved from city to city and state to state, until the FBI intervened. He was eventually added to the list of the country's 10 most wanted fugitives, which ultimately led to his capture. Hugh received multiple life sentences, but his troubles didn't end there. He attempted to end his life in his cell. Fortunately, the guards intervened in time and saved him, allowing him to continue serving his sentence. Detectives in Candi's case visited Hugh in prison multiple times, trying to gather information about the case. Despite repeatedly denying any involvement, he took a polygraph test to prove his innocence. The test results suggested he was telling the truth, but these results are considered unreliable and therefore cannot be used as evidence in court. At the time of the murder, Hugh lived in Spokane, and furthermore, he had a criminal record of similar incidents that made investigators suspicious. They initially considered him the primary suspect due to he familiar with this neighborhood. But he consistently denied any involvement. Although they suspected him, they did not have enough evidence to conclude his involvement in the crime. The police then shifted their attention to another suspect, 49-year-old Howard Barnett. He was arrested in February 1960 for allegedly molesting a minor girl. Shortly after his arrest, he ended his life right in his cell at the Spokane police station. Hugh wrote a cryptic message in his own blood on the wall before his death, stating, "He have a sin before the Lord." However, it wasn't until after he passed away that his wife became aware of his arrest. She then asked the police if they thought Hugh might have been involved in Candi's death. Despite several investigations, no concrete evidence was found to connect Hugh to the crime. The police continued to pursue new leads over the years, looking into other possible suspects. A woman came forward with information, stating that on the day of Candi's disappearance, she saw a green car following her. Police reopened the case multiple times but were unable to gather evidence linking the green car or any other. The case was reopened periodically over the years but always hit a dead end. The investigation into Candi's murder was complicated by numerous false confessions. 13 individuals came forward claiming to be the killer, but when questioned by the police, they couldn't provide any details that only the real killer would know. Instead, they simply repeated details they had read in the newspapers. The police department changed personnel a lot during the investigation. However, none were able to solve the case, allowing Candi's murder to remain one of the state's most notorious and baffling crimes. The crime had a profound impact on the local community, leading many parents to reevaluate their perception of safety and ultimately changing the way they supervised their children's outdoor activities. In the early 2000s, the case was reopened, and a new detective used modern technologies to help with the investigation. Fortunately, the police had collected and preserved crucial evidence in 1959, which allowed experts to take another look. By using modern DNA analysis, they were able to identify a male semen sample on the Candi's clothing. Further analysis of the DNA sample was done to create a profile, which was then entered into the FBI database, but yielded no matches. Investigators also compared the DNA to samples from multiple suspects, but none of them matched. For many years, people suspected Hugh Morse of committing the crime, but forensic evidence revealed no link between him and the murder. As a result, the investigation stalled once again. Although the police had a DNA sample from the perpetrator who sexually assaulted and killed Candi, identifying the individual continued to elude them. In 2021, authorities reopened the case, and a new detective chose to use genetic genealogy, a cutting-edge DNA analysis method, had already solved numerous cold cases. By applying this innovative approach, the detective hoped that the case will be solved. The detective reached out to several labs that specialized in the analysis he needed, but they all shared the same frustrating news. They concluded the sample had deteriorated too much, making it impossible to extract the necessary information. Undeterred, the detective contacted one final lab, and it has provided new clues that are helpful to the investigation. Armed with state-of-the-art tools, the experts were able to analyze the sample successfully and generate a DNA profile of the perpetrator. This profile was then uploaded to genealogical databases, allowing investigators to begin searching for the DNA owner's relatives. After carefully examining thousands of individuals, then they narrowed down their focus to one specific family. Upon investigating this family, the investigators discovered that the DNA sample likely came from one of 3 brothers, but all 3 brothers had passed away. However, one of the brothers had a living daughter. The police reached out to her about the possibility that her father might have been involved in the murder. Despite her initial shock, she agreed to cooperate with the investigation. The woman provided a DNA sample, which was compared to the semen found on Candi's clothing. The results confirmed that she was closely related to culprit, who left the DNA evidence on Candi's clothing. Based on this new information, the police obtained a court order to exhume the woman's father's grave. DNA experts extracted a DNA profile from his remains and compared it to the semen found on Candi's clothing. After a 62-year wait, the results revealed a definitive match between the DNA from the woman's father and the semen found on Candi's clothing. This confirmed that the perpetrator was a man named John Ryhoff. John Ryhoff was not initially identified as a suspect following Candi's murder. However, detectives later investigated his biography and found links to other crimes. At the time of the murder, John was 20 years old and lived within a mile of Candi's house. He was also stationed at an army base near where her body was discovered. 2 years after the murder, John committed another crime when he attacked a woman, binding and sexually assaulting her, then attempting to kill her. The woman managed to survive the attack. As a result of the assault, John was arrested and sentenced to 6 months in prison. He also received a dishonorable discharge from the army. Upon his release from prison, John started a family and has 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. He kept a low profile and appeared to be living an ordinary life, working multiple jobs. One of these jobs was at a food packaging plant, where he suffered a severe chemical burn to his face and leaving a scar. John finally ended his life in June 1970, at the age of 31, leaving no note or explanation. The authorities determined that the victim, Candi, may have known her killer, John. Candi's friend, who was 10 years old at the time of the murder, was revealed to be the killer's sister. Years later, she recalled how she cried in her brother's, John's arms after learning about Candi's death. Unaware that he was the person responsible. Sadly, Candi's parents did not live to see their daughter's case solved. Candi's mother passed away in 2006, and her father died life in 1963, for years after Candi's murder, likely due to his inability to cope with his loss. After 62 years, the case was finally solved, marking one of the longest investigations in history. The investigation involved multiple detectives from different generations. At the press conference announcing the killer's identity, only one officer who worked on the case in 1959 was present. He expressed gratitude for having lived long enough to see the case resolved and to finally know the truth. The daughter of the killer, John Ryhoff, initially struggled to accept that her father committed such a heinous crime. However, she eventually came to terms with the fact, describing her father as a monster who took an innocent girl's life. She has expressed regret that her father was not held accountable for his actions during his lifetime. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Michael Haight. Michael Haight was born on January 7, 1980, in Seattle, Washington. As a child, his family moved to Cedar City, Utah. As a child, Michael enjoyed regular kid activities like baseball, basketball, and soccer. He was also an Eagle Scout and did well in school. After graduating from high school in 1998, Michael spent a summer working at a fish plant in Alaska. He quickly rose to the position of line manager, supervising over a dozen people. His work ethic and dedication were recognized, leading to his promotion. A hard-working member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Michael went on a mission trip to southern Brazil. This experience strengthened his faith and commitment to his community. After returning to the United States, Michael attended Southern Utah University, graduating with a business degree in 2004. While at the university, Michael met his future wife, Tasha Earle. They fell in love and were married at St. George's Temple on May 10, 2003. Michael seemed to be the epitome of a hard-working husband and father. He coached his children's sports teams, attended school concerts, and spent time with them skiing and doing projects in the garage. However, on January 4, 2023, a shocking discovery exposed the dark reality of Michael's family life. That day, police found 8 bodies in Michael's home, leaving police and neighbors stunned and baffled. The alarm was raised when Tasha Haight missed an online appointment and her husband Michael did not show up for work, prompting worried co-workers to call the police and request a welfare check at the family's home. Officers went to Michael's Enoch home, but no one answered when they knocked. Upon further inspection, the home appeared to be empty. Since Michael's family had 5 children, officers contacted the Iron County School District to check if any children were at school. They discovered that no children were there. When officers arrived at Michael's home, the Michaels lived in a 1-story home with a basement. Detectives arrived shortly after the home was designated a crime scene. Upon entering the master bedroom, they found 4-year-old Gavin lying face down, his head turned to the left. One of his arms was propped up under his head on a pillow, and a blanket partially covered his body. Tasha was similarly covered, with only part of her body under the blanket. On the other side of the bed, police found an older woman, later identified as Gail Earle, Tasha's mother. Gail was lying on her back with her head on a pillow, and was also partially covered with a blanket, as were her daughter and grandson. When police searched Michael's home, they came across Bryn's room. Inside, they found the 12-year-old girl lying on the bed, slightly elevated and partially covered with a blanket. When they entered Amon's room, police found a 7-year-old boy lying face down in the corner. Notably, unlike his siblings, he had no pillow or blanket. Sienna, Amon's twin sister, was found in her bedroom, lying on her left side on the bed with her head on a pillow, covered with a blanket. Michael's oldest child, Macy, 17, was also found on the bed, her head on a pillow and her body covered with a blanket. Police later located Michael in the basement gym, where he was lying on a sleeping bag. Each of the 8 victims suffered fatal gunshot wounds. It didn't take long for police to identify Michael Haight as the prime suspect. They believe he killed his wife, mother-in-law, and 5 children before taking his own life. As the investigation began, a neighbor shared important information that helped police create a timeline of events. The neighbor reported that she woke up at 3:30 a.m. to use the bathroom and heard a loud bang that sounded like fireworks. However, she knew that the day fireworks were allowed in the neighborhood had passed, which made her feel uneasy. The neighbor went on to say that after the first bang, she heard 2 more bangs in quick succession. This noise was followed by a short pause, then several more bangs. Police suspect that the loud noises the neighbor heard around 3:30 a.m. were related to the brutal murder that occurred that night, which they believe was committed by Michael. During the investigation, police learned that a non-family member had reported the abuse to the Department of Child Services in 2020. The person spoke with Macy, then 14, and she shared her fears about her father, leading to a further investigation into the Michael family. After receiving the report, child welfare and child protection agencies interviewed Macy and her parents separately. During Macy's interview, she shared alarming details. She mentioned instances where her father choked her, leaving her in fear for her life. Macy revealed that these violent incidents began in 2017. One incident involved her father grabbing her by the shoulders and pushing her against a piece of wooden furniture. When police spoke with Macy's father, Michael, he denied harming his daughter. He downplayed the seriousness of the incidents Macy described, calling them a misunderstanding. Michael attributed his emotional state to the death of his father and his brother's recent divorce. Michael admitted to taking his frustrations out on his eldest daughter. However, his wife, Tasha, chose not to file a criminal complaint against him. After an investigation, Child Protective Services, the Enoch Police Department, and the Iron County District Attorney's Office also decided not to prosecute because the case did not meet the criteria for prosecution. Additionally, a fatality assessment was conducted with Tasha, and according to her response, it did not indicate that her relationship with Michael was fatal. However, victim support services were provided to Tasha and the children in the months after the case was opened. Through conversations with Tasha's friends, the police developed a different view of Michael than the one he presented to the public. When visiting Tasha, her friends would often leave the kitchen faucet on to hide their conversations because Tasha suspected Michael was eavesdropping. To avoid giving Michael a reason to yell at Tasha, her friends would also help her with housework. Whenever they texted Tasha, she would reply with short, positive messages, possibly knowing that Michael might be reading them. This behavior suggested that Tasha was trying to maintain a positive appearance in front of Michael, implying that their marriage was not in trouble. Police investigating the case discovered that Michael displayed a high level of control over his wife, Tasha. He exercised this control in a variety of ways, including confiscating her car keys and phone to restrict her freedom. Additionally, Michael's reaction when Tasha purchased a $30 rug from Walmart to replace her dirty carpet raised further suspicions about his behavior. Tasha needed to buy a rug, but her husband, Michael, was angry and said it was a waste of money. Tasha talked to her friends about how her 7-year-old son, Amon, had begun to act like his father, imitating his father's bad behavior. When Tasha asked Amon to do something, he would say, "That's not my job," which worried Tasha because it showed that Amon was not taking responsibility and was not listening to her. This is similar to how Michael often ignores or dismisses Tasha's requests, and it seems that Amon is adopting similar habits. In 2022, Tasha made the rare decision to get a manicure as an act of self-care. However, her husband, Michael, objected and tried to limit her freedom. Despite this, Tasha still felt younger and more confident after getting her nails done. She decided to make this a monthly habit, but Michael strongly objected because of cost concerns. Tasha explained that it would only cost $25 a month, but Michael was still unconvinced. He argued that spending money on her nails would take away from the needs of her children, demonstrating a controlling attitude and a strong sense of financial responsibility. At the same time, Tasha began taking better care of herself and losing weight. This came after years of her husband, Michael, calling her fat and ugly. However, instead of being supportive, Michael becomes angry when she loses weight. He accuses her of being unfaithful, trying to explain away her change in appearance. Michael's controlling behavior escalates as he tries to order Tasha to stop losing weight. He begs her to stop because he fears that other men will find her attractive. This demand stems from his own deep insecurities and his need to control his wife's body and actions. Tasha's friends report an incident involving the family's kitchen table to the police. The table is broken and Tasha needs to replace it. However, her husband, Michael, refuses to provide the necessary funds. Frustrated by the situation, Tasha decides to take matters into her own hands. She decides to refurbish the old table, hoping to improve its appearance and functionality. Michael is unhappy with this decision because Tasha did not ask for his permission. This is not the first time this has happened. During the holiday season, Michael was very frugal with the family finances. Despite earning a substantial income from his job at Haight, he only gave $100 to each child for Christmas gifts. Tasha always wanted to give her children a full Christmas, but Michael's reluctance to add money made this difficult. He believed his income was legitimate and did not feel the need to provide more for the family. Michael's intense focus on reducing waste and conserving resources leads him to impose strict household rules on Tasha. She is required to wash and reuse plastic bags, no matter how many times they have been used. This adds to Tasha's responsibilities, leaving her feeling overwhelmed. Additionally, Michael's need for control also affects Tasha's hygiene and childcare habits. Michael requires Tasha to use wipes and, claiming that it is better for the environment and will save money. However, this makes Tasha feel uncomfortable and stressed. If she does not follow Michael's instructions, he will punish her severely. He makes it clear that disobedience will lead to a lot of trouble for her. This threat creates a sense of fear and submission in Tasha, leaving her with no choice but to comply with Michael's demands. According to Tasha's friends, she shared with them that Michael's abuse was initially directed at her during their marriage. However, in the late 2010s, Michael began abusing their children as well. Macy suffered greatly as the abuse escalated. Michael put a lot of pressure on Macy to get straight A's. The burden of these unrealistic expectations became too much for Macy to bear. Macy's friends reported another disturbing incident to the police. One evening, Michael came home to find Macy sitting with her head in her mother's lap. He became angry and told Macy to get up and clean her room. This left Macy deeply disturbed, as she recalled looking into her father's eyes and seeing hatred and evil. Police also discovered an incident involving 7-year-old Briley, who was playing with a changing table and would not stop when Michael told her to stop. This led Michael to blame his wife, Tasha, for their children's behavior, calling them the worst kids in the world, disrespectful and horrible. Furthermore, Michael would insult Tasha, calling her fat and ugly, all in front of their 5 children. Tasha decided to end her 20-year marriage to Michael after his abusive behavior and uncontrollable rages. This event made her realize the harm it was causing their children, and she knew she had to leave the marriage. Although the divorce was difficult for Tasha after 2 decades together, she prioritized the safety and well-being of her children over her commitment to the marriage. On December 21, 2022, Tasha filed for divorce from her husband, Michael. However, she requested that the divorce papers be delivered after the holidays, wanting one last normal Christmas for her 5 children before separating. Tasha anticipated that Michael's behavior would worsen once the papers were delivered, and she sought to shield their children from potential repercussions during the holidays. The divorce papers were delivered to Michael at his office on December 27. Michael contacted Tasha and conversed as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. During the call, he asked Tasha to leave their home but demanded that she leave their children behind. Tasha was adamant that she would not leave without the children. Tasha took the children to her mother's house in Lynn, Utah, despite Michael's objections. That evening, Michael went to his mother-in-law's house and asked Tasha to go out with him, but she refused. Tasha told friends that she felt uneasy being alone with Michael. After Tasha filed for divorce, her mother, Gail Earle, moved in to support Tasha and the children. However, Michael's behavior made the situation worse. Instead of leaving the house, Michael moved into the basement, which also served as a gym. He slept on a sleeping bag on the floor, used a pillow, and hung his clothes on a hanger on a couch outside the door. Tasha shared her concerns with her friends about a major problem she had discovered. She discovered that $220,000 had disappeared from the children's savings accounts. After further investigation, she discovered that Michael was responsible for secretly transferring money without telling her. Additionally, Tasha inherited several weapons from her late father, including shotguns and handguns. However, in early January 2023, she noticed that all of these weapons were missing from her home. A subsequent investigation revealed that Michael had taken these weapons, leaving Tasha and her family unprotected and vulnerable in the event of an emergency. Macy, the eldest daughter of Michael and Tasha, has told several friends that she supports her parents' divorce. She feels that the presence of her father, Michael, in the home has caused tension and she wishes for peace in the separation. Macy has even taken steps to document her father's behavior, secretly recording him with a hidden phone when he acts erratically. She has confided to a friend that she is gathering evidence to support her parents' divorce. However, her mother, Tasha, found the phone and took it away. Macy's younger sister, Briley, faced a difficult home life due to constant trouble. To escape, Briley often went to a neighbor's house, where she found comfort in playing with the neighbor's grandchildren, who were children about her age. She told a friend that she was really relieved when her parents got divorced and was even looking forward to buying some new books, but she didn't dare tell her father because she was afraid he would be angry. On January 3, 2023, Tasha met with her attorney to discuss her divorce from her abusive husband Michael. At the time, Michael was still living in the family home, but had recently moved into the basement, which provided Tasha with some relief. Her attorneys asked her if she ever felt concerned for her safety or that of her children because of Michael's erratic behavior. Despite Michael's occasional outbursts, Tasha told her attorneys that she never felt her safety or that of her children was threatened. In retrospect, it is clear that Tasha's optimism and misplaced trust in her husband were tragically misplaced. The investigation into the shooting of Michael Haight's family was a difficult and disturbing process for police as they reconstructed the events that led to the tragedy. A chilling discovery emerged from digital evidence collected from the family's computers and cell phones. On December 30th, just days before the shooting, Michael made a disturbing Google search at 10:41 p.m. He searched for information about guns and shootings, which, combined with other evidence, suggested a dark intent. Search queries included questions about how loud a 9mm gun is, how to recognize a gunshot, and what to do if you hear a gunshot in your neighborhood. In a letter Michael wrote before he took his own life, he said he would rather rot in hell than endure what he described as his wife's controlling behavior. Michael expressed that he could not endure the situation for another day and was determined to end the manipulation and control he had endured. Michael's letter expressed deep frustration and despair. He had repeatedly asked for help, but no one seemed to listen. In this letter, Michael emphasized his determination not to become a burden to society. The details of the letter he left behind shocked and disbelieving many. Michael's actions were calculated and premeditated. He had planned the murder carefully, ensuring that his wife and children would not find out until it was too late. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of McKenzie Shirilla. McKenzie Shirilla was born in August 2004 in Strongsville, Ohio. The youngest of 3 children, McKenzie received a lot of love and pampering from her parents, John Shirilla and Natalie Stevens. Her parents prioritized her education and encouraged she to pursue every goal she loved. Being the youngest also gave her a tolerance. She was often forgiven for many of her mischievous pranks during her childhood, and even when she committed some more serious mistakes, she would still be forgiven by her parents. McKenzie grew up as a spoiled and entitled girl who often got her way. Her parents gave in to her demands, which led her to believe she could act however she wanted without consequence. As a young child, she was kind and friendly, but as she grew older, her behavior and character began to deteriorate. If things didn't go her way, she would throw tantrums, lose her temper, and use bad language. She was prone to physical altercations and would often disregard others. McKenzie only cared about her own opinions and desires, insisted on getting her way, and prioritized her own interests above all else. During his teenage years, McKenzie became very difficult and unbearable personality, but her parents never thought it was out of the ordinary. To them, her behavior was a normal part of growing up and a phase she would eventually outgrow. They chose to respond with understanding and patience. However, McKenzie's behavior worsened over time. In high school, she started using alcohol and occasionally experimenting with illicit drugs, often managing to avoid consequences for her actions. Her reckless behavior not only endangers herself but also the people around her. McKenzie's parents seemed to be unaware of, or possibly chose to ignore, the obvious issues their daughter was facing. Like many teenagers, she was glued to her smartphone and frequently posted provocative photos and comments on social media. Her actions weren't unusual among her friends, as they often engaged in vandalism, fought, stole, and had run-ins with the police. However, they rarely faced serious consequences, typically receiving only warnings and educational discussions, which may have led them to believe that they could act as they pleased without facing repercussions. Dominic Russo, a young man from Strongsville, was a stark contrast to McKenzie. Born in September 2001, he was the 4th of 7 children to Frank and Christine Russo. Growing up, Dominic was close to his 3 brothers and 3 sisters. He was an exemplary student, actively participated in sports, and prioritized a healthy lifestyle. Throughout his childhood, Dominic excelled academically, participated in sports, and prioritized a healthy lifestyle. Despite being part of a large family, Dominic and his siblings never lacked parental love, attention, or care. Frank and Christine Russo were moderately strict but also supportive of their children's interests. As a result, Dominic always had a lot of friends and was accustomed to being the center of attention. His attractive appearance and charming personality made him a popular figure, and he had many admirers from a young age. However, Dominic preferred to focus on meaningful relationships rather than fleeting romances. After completing high school, Dominic attended a local university, specializing in performing arts with a focus on music production. His ambition was to become a renowned music producer, and he was also a skilled singer-songwriter. By the time he was 20, Dominic had established his own business, purchased a car, and was living in a rented apartment in a good neighborhood. Additionally, he excelled as a student and athlete at the university. Dominic first met McKenzie at a mutual friend's party. This chance encounter turned out to be pivotal for both of them. As complete opposites, they found themselves drawn to each other. Dominic, with his charming and cultured demeanor, quickly caught McKenzie's eye. He was distinctly different from the people she normally socialized with, possessing qualities that set him apart. He was well-educated, well-mannered, and engaging, able to effortlessly converse on a wide range of topics. McKenzie had a striking appearance and a slender figure that caught people's attention. She knew how to present herself and often relied on her charm to make an impression. McKenzie quickly won over the guy she had been interested in, Dominic, and by fall 2021, they started dating. Not long after that, the two introduced each other to their families. While McKenzie's parents were thrilled with her choice, considering the guy an excellent match for their daughter, Dominic's parents had mixed feelings about McKenzie. They found her endearing and innocent at first, but there was something about her that immediately raised concerns for Frank and Christine Russo. Those close to McKenzie believed she had truly fallen in love for the first time, and they hoped this relationship would have a positive impact on her life. Unfortunately, no one could have predicted the tragic endings that would eventually bring their romance to an end. As McKenzie and Dominic spent more time together, they began to appear in public, holding hands and showing affection for each other. It wasn't long before the entire small town knew about their relationship. While some people who knew McKenzie well felt sorry for her boyfriend, Dominic, most were simply happy for the couple. As time passed, Dominic started to notice strange behavior in McKenzie. She was constantly defiant and tried to get everyone to do what she wanted. At first, Dominic thought her behavior was due to her youth and desire for attention. Despite her behavior, the couple made plans for their future, discussing marriage as soon as McKenzie turned 18. They also hoped to leave their small town and move to a big city, such as New York, where Dominic could pursue a music career and showcase his talent. Over time, McKenzie's behavior became increasingly alarming and sometimes frightening to Dominic. She asks him to do what she wants, and if he doesn't agree with her, she gets angry and acts very nasty. Dominic initially disregarded McKenzie's controlling behavior as a joking matter, but then he soon realized her true nature. In public, she maintained a composed exterior, but when they were alone, she took out her anger on him and sometimes attacked him. Dominic felt he couldn't stand his girlfriend any longer and proposed a temporary separation to reconsider their feelings. However, McKenzie responded by having a very breakdown in front of their mutual friends. She yelled, threatened to harm Dominic if he ended the relationship, and even threatened to burn down his house and wreck his car. These actions had the opposite effect of what McKenzie intended. This makes Dominic even more want to end their toxic relationship. McKenzie was determined to hold on to her boyfriend, refusing to acknowledge the end of the relationship. Initially, she acted as though nothing was wrong, continuing to call Dominic and invite him to various parties and events. She also posted affectionate photos of the two on social media, express her love for him. However, when Dominic made it clear that the relationship was over, McKenzie's behavior changed. She became furious and began showing up at his house almost daily, standing under his window and shouting insults and threats. She also resorted to calling him from different phone numbers, leaving messages on his answering machine, and sending emails. In these messages, Mackenzie's tone was inconsistent. Sometimes she will gently express her feelings for him and offer to restart the relationship. However, there are times when she will use insults and threats against Dominic. Dominic was baffled by Mackenzie's behavior, having never experienced anything similar before. He struggled to respond and tried various approaches, including talking to her and ignoring her. He also documented her aggressive outbursts using his phone. The situation became unbearable as Mackenzie would publicly scream at and insult Dominic whenever she saw him, making his life extremely difficult. Despite this, Dominic held on to the hope that with time, Mackenzie would eventually leave him alone and move on. Mackenzie made a shocking statement in front of witnesses, saying it would be easier for her to kill Dominic than to let him move on from her. She threatened that if he didn't return to her, she would make sure no one else could have him. At first, Dominic didn't take her words seriously, but those around him knew she was not joking. Her threats also included hitting and running him over with a car, driving him off a cliff, or stopping on railroad tracks in front of an oncoming train. She described each scenario in detail, as if she had already planned it out. However, Mackenzie soon realized that her threats and insults only pushed Dominic further away. She decided to change her tactics, switching from being aggressive to being sweet and charming again. She stopped pressuring and harassing Dominic and pretended to have learned from her mistakes, wanting to change for the better. She started talking about college plans, asking for his help in choosing a university, and claiming that she had become more focused on her studies, particularly her upcoming final exams. Dominic was pleasantly surprised by the changes in Mackenzie and, still having feelings for her, he decided to help her with her university enrollment. As they started seeing each other again, they gradually rekindled their closeness. Dominic began taking her on dates and spending all his free time with her, thinking she had become more mature and responsible. He fell in love with her again without even realizing it, and their past issues seemed to fade away. This time, they kept their reunion private and didn't tell their friends and acquaintances about it. Therefore, their dates are private and discreet, allowing them to enjoy their time together without seeking outside attention. When Dominic's brother Angelo found out, he warned that nothing good would come of it. But Dominic didn't listen, because he loved her too much, so he didn't pay attention to his brother's words. Dominic thinks that Mackenzie has changed positively after they reunited, but he had no idea what she was really planning. Unbeknownst to him, Mackenzie had devised a sinister plan to exact revenge on he. She became obsessed with the idea of a disastrous car accident. She would spend her free time traveling around the city and looking for the perfect place to carry out her plan. Mackenzie considered crashing into a steep cliff or stepping in front of the train, but she couldn't find cliff nearby and thought the idea of blocking the train was untrustworthy. One day, while driving through an industrial area, she stumbled upon a secluded spot with no cameras or traffic. A massive brick wall caught her attention, and her twisted imagination quickly conjured up a new and equally horrific plan. She decided that accelerating to top speed and crashing into the wall would be just as spectacular as the other ideas she had considered. Initially, Mackenzie had planned to end her life alongside her lover, Dominic, intending for their tragic story to become a cautionary tale for the entire city. She had confided in her best friend about this plan, but her friend thought she was joking because she had had such wild ideas before. In late July 2022, just days before Mackenzie's 18th birthday, she asked Dominic if he wanted to attend a mutual friend's party with her. She told him that it would be the perfect opportunity for them to have some fun, relax, and make it clear to everyone that they were back together and deeply in love. Dominic quickly agreed, as he still trusted Mackenzie and didn't question her feelings or intentions. On the night of July 30th, Dominic and Mackenzie arriving at the party holding hands. Their entrance caught everyone's attention, and they looked happy and in love as they openly displayed their affection for each other. Their friends were genuinely thrilled to see them reunited but notice how well-suited the couple was. When night fell, Dominic and McKenzie freely took photos, kissed and enjoyed their time together without any hesitation. However, no one had any idea that this joyful celebration would take a devastating turn. Dominic and McKenzie drank some alcohol, like other people at that party, but McKenzie secretly took a dose of illegal drugs, for courage, to not change her mind at the last minute and slammed on the brakes. The next morning, Dominic and McKenzie bid farewell to the guests and began to head out to their car. However, they were approached by a friend of the guy, Davion Flanagan, who requested a ride home in their vehicle. McKenzie tried to decline request, said that they had made other plans, but Dominic didn't see any problem with driving his friend home. McKenzie eventually relented, and she agreed to give Davion a ride home. McKenzie took the driver's seat, with Dominic beside her and Davion behind him. They left the party venue and headed onto the main road. McKenzie drove cautiously, adhering to the speed limit and avoiding drawing attention to themselves. When they approached an empty intersection, she stopped at the red light. As they waited, Davion dozed off, allowing her to reconsider her intentions. In her later statement, McKenzie claimed she had planned to die in an accident, but her words were discredited by the fact that she had buckled her seatbelt during the previous stop, while Davion remained unbuckled. As the light turned green, McKenzie suddenly accelerated and took a sharp turn onto a poorly lit secondary road that led into an industrial area. Dominic and Davion seemed unaware of what was happening, and the car sped up as if McKenzie had lost control. Pressing hard on the gas pedal, she careened the vehicle toward a brick wall. Luckily, a witness happened to be in the area. On an early Sunday morning, the industrial area was deserted, with no other people around to see the accident or offer assistance. However, a woman who lived near the scene heard the crash and went outside to find out what's happening. Seeing smoke and realizing a car had crashed, she quickly returned to her home to call for emergency help. About 30 minutes after the accident, medics arrived at the scene. Unfortunately, Davion and Dominic in the car succumbed to their injuries and died instantly. McKenzie, however, was fortunate to have survived thanks to her seatbelt and airbags. McKenzie, the driver, was unconscious and trapped in the wreckage with severe leg injuries, but she was breathing and had a palpable pulse, giving hope that she will survive. During the process of being freed from the car, McKenzie briefly regained consciousness but she appeared disoriented and unaware of her surroundings. Once released from the vehicle, she was immediately rushed to the hospital for treatment. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed McKenzie with multiple fractures and viscera injuries. Blood tests also revealed that she had been under the influence of both alcohol and drugs at the time of the accident. The police initially received leads and a confession in the investigation. After learning the results of McKenzie's tests, it was thought that she was under the influence of addictive substances and didn't understand her actions. It's possible she tried to drive through the wall or didn't notice any obstacles, as there was no sign of braking. Since McKenzie was unconscious in the intensive care unit after a complex operation, the police couldn't question her at first. When she regained consciousness, she became hysterical and confessed to the doctor, saying she deliberately crashed into the wall to kill Dominic and initially intended to die with him. McKenzie also said that Dave was an unintended victim because he was hitchhiking in their car. Doctors dismissed McKenzie's confession, believing it was a delusional state caused by anesthesia, painkillers, and grief over her boyfriend's death. However, when the police spoke with McKenzie, her story changed completely. This time, McKenzie said she remembered almost nothing about the incident of that night due to consuming alcohol and using illegal substances. McKenzie claimed she had a memory lapse after getting in the car and had no idea how Davion ended up in the car. However, evidence contradicted this. Surveillance footage tracked the car's initial route and showed McKenzie driving cautiously and following the rules until she suddenly turned onto a road leading to an industrial area. Furthermore, it was discovered that McKenzie had previously driven the entire route days earlier, and her car had been spotted by multiple witnesses. After being discharged from the hospital, McKenzie quickly recovered and attempted to resume her disinterested life. She showed no remorse for her actions and was confident about evading consequences. She became active on social media again, met with friends, and made future plans. By September, she even attended a concert in a nearby city, featuring her favorite band, seemed unaffected by her boyfriend's passing. McKenzie lived an active life despite having her legs in a fragile state. She would often appear at concerts in a wheelchair, wearing vibrant makeup and taking selfies to share on social media. Just a month after recovering, McKenzie attended a Halloween party in a pre-made costume where she met new people and enjoyed herself. However, her life has changed completely on November 4, 2022, when she was taken into custody. The investigation gathered enough evidence to bring the case to trial. McKenzie was charged with premeditated aggravated double murder and possession of a controlled substance found in her pocket and detected in her blood. However, during the trial, McKenzie changed her testimony multiple times. Initially, she claimed to have memory loss, but when her friend testified against her, revealing her plan, she shifted her defense. McKenzie then claimed she had intended to die alongside her lover, but this was disproven when it was discovered she had secured herself with a seatbelt. Mackenzie Sherrill was found guilty of all charges on August 21, 2023. However, due to her age at the time of the crime, just 5 days shy of her 18th birthday, the court took this into consideration and tried her as a minor. Under state law, McKenzie was eligible for consecutive 15-year prison sentences without parole for each murder she committed. However, due to her young age, the court decided to let her serve these sentences simultaneously. This meant she would be eligible for parole in 15 years. By that time, McKenzie would be 33 years old. Both the prosecution and defense expressed displeasure with the court's decision. Dominic family members felt the sentence was too lenient, and they intended to appeal for a stricter punishment. On the other hand, McKenzie's parents and lawyer believed the sentence was too harsh and decided to appeal as well. The judge refused to change the sentence, questioning whether McKenzie would be released after 15 years in prison. In his opinion, McKenzie showed no remorse for her actions and displayed arrogance towards the court. The extended prison term would provide her with ample time to reflect on the gravity of her crimes. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sean Eckard. Donna and Samuel Eckard were a couple who were related before they got married. Both had experienced unsuccessful marriages before and had a total of 6 adult children. After a difficult past, they found peace with each other and decided to move to San Diego, California, to start a new life. There, they rented a spacious house and regularly attended local church activities on weekends. The family was very religious and lived a quiet life without much social interaction. A few years after moving, the family welcomed their first son, Stanley, and 2 years later, their second son, Sean. Donna devoted all her time to taking care of the house and raising the 2 children, so the boys grew up surrounded by love and care. Both attended a good local school. On weekends, the family participated in church activities. As adults, the 2 children left their parents to start their own family's acros. The country. However, the Eckard family still maintained a close relationship. They often contacted each other, called each other, and spent all their holidays together. Sean was a cheerful and easygoing boy. He was attractive, intelligent, and a good listener, so he made friends easily. In contrast, Stanley was a bit shy and found socializing difficult. He was often reserved about new things and had trouble communicating with his younger brother. Despite their different personalities, the two brothers were very close and cared for each other. They had the same group of friends and were always ready to help one another. Both were well-behaved and good at studying. The relationship between Sean and Stanley was very good. They trusted each other and often joked happily. Their parents also supported this relationship. In the family, mutual respect was highly valued. Donna and Samuel raised their children in the faith and the law of God from an early age. The Eckard family lived quietly. Vs. As they grew up, the two brothers developed very different interests. Sean, the youngest, played in a band, while Stanley, the oldest, loved martial arts. Every evening, the family gathered before dinner to share their experiences of the day. Sean was usually the first to tell a story, and stories about music, friends, and his future plans took up most of the time. Everyone listened attentively to Sean. Stanley, on the other hand, had few opportunities to share and did not feel like he had much to say. He had no big plans for the future, nor interesting stories or experiences with friends to hold attention. So Stanley often listened quietly to his younger brother's stories. One evening, Sean told his family about Mary Jane, his new neighbor. She was a beautiful young woman with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair. Sean was fascinated by the wonderful piano music coming from her house. Enthralled by the music, Sean boldly entered the house without knocking. Although the situation was somewhat awkward, Sean handled it with confidence and grace, making a good impression on Mary Jane. Although she was a few years older than Sean, they became close friends. Sean often organized picnics and invited Mary Jane to join. They went on many walks together, visiting parks and observatories. However, their budding romance was interrupted by the difficulties of adult life. The Eckard family received news that Donna, Sean's mother, was seriously ill. Sean's parents tried to consider the interests of everyone in the family when making a decision, but this completely changed their lives. Although Sean did not want to leave his hometown, friends, and Mary Jane, he was forced to accept his parents' decision. In 2005, the Eckard family decided to leave the city where they had lived for many years and move to another state. They settled in Donna's mother's house in the small town of Spring Hill, Florida. This decision brought many positive changes to the whole family. Donna began to recover. Initially, Sean felt sad about leaving the band, familiar places, and friends, especially Mary Jane. However, with his optimistic personality, Sean quickly adapted to his new life. Gradually, he realized that life in Spring Hill was as full and meaningful as in the old place. Donna and Samuel found stable jobs at the Presbyterian church, where they spent most of their time. Donna worked at the nursery, taking care of children, while Samuel assisted at the chapel. Gradually, the two brothers regained their close relationship and made friends at their new school. Their lives seemed to be reborn in this new environment. Sean continued to join the school band, while Stanley attended a martial arts school near his new home. Despite his busy life, Sean could not stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every night after school, Sean would stay in his room and talk on the phone for hours. The conversations always ended with Sean promising to meet his girlfriend again. He promised to visit her as soon as his parents allowed it. While Sean kept his first love in his heart, his older brother Stanley tried to assert himself in the family. Stanley had a quiet and humble personality and seemed to receive little attention from his parents. In order to attract attention, he made many wrong decisions, which had serious consequences for the whole family. In May 2006, he informed his parents of his intention to drop out of school to pursue a martial arts career and open a martial arts club. However, due to the recklessness of youth, he joined a bad group, where he began to engage in petty fraud and experiment with illegal drugs. By 2007, bad relationships led to Stanley's arrest for theft and fraud. The news of his eldest son's wrongdoing shocked Donna, causing her to be hospitalized for a heart attack. Fortunately, the situation was quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer. This lawyer skillfully defended Stanley by pointing out the lack of direct evidence, helping him to be quickly released and receive only a suspended sentence. This incident left Stanley extremely scared, feeling guilty, hoping for sympathy and acceptance from his family. Meanwhile, after experiencing the terrifying events that happened to Stanley, Sean did not tell his parents about his decision. During the summer vacation, he worked as a waiter to save money. He then left a note for his mother, informing her that he was going to California to meet Mary Jane. The 2-day bus ride to Sean's lover seemed endless. The scenery changed, day turned to night, and Sean looked forward to meeting Mary Jane at the final destination. When the bus stopped, Sean eagerly ran to her, having seen her radiant face and long hair through the window. They spent the happiest days together, going on picnics like in high school. For the first time, Sean expressed his love to Mary, and she returned his feelings. After a walk, Sean and Mary Jane sat down on a bench. Suddenly, Sean felt dizzy, his vision went black, and he fainted. He was rushed to the hospital, his health rapidly deteriorating. Mary Jane contacted Sean's sister, Jennifer, who hurried to California. Doctors determined that the cause of Sean's rapid deterioration was a tick-borne disease. The disease developed suddenly and rapidly, causing many complications, including encephalitis. A grueling battle to save Sean's life began, with doctors working tirelessly for a long time to bring him back to health. After more than a month in a coma and 6 months of rehabilitation, Sean was saved. His recovery was arduous. It was surprising that a small tick bite during a summer walk could cause such a serious illness. Jennifer took her brother back to Florida for further treatment and long-term recovery. Mary Jane was forced to stay behind, only able to communicate with her boyfriend by phone. Despite the hardships and unexpected illness, these events brought the Eckard family closer together. Donna did her best to help her beloved son Sean overcome his serious illness. She closely monitored his diet and exercise regimen. This devoted care helped Sean recover completely, but also caused Stanley to gradually harbor resentment and jealousy. After recovering, Sean continued his music studies and graduated in 2009. He dreamed of introducing Mary Jane, his favorite, to his family. However, this plan did not work out. Instead, Stanley introduced his younger brother to Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly became friends with the two brothers. Stanley was fond of her and sympathetic towards her, while she was attracted to Sean's cheerful and outgoing personality. For a while, Stanley actively pursued Samantha, and she reciprocated his interest. They had a few romantic dates, ending in passionate kisses. Stanley was very happy, but Samantha, despite accepting his advances, could not stop thinking about Sean. Samantha wrote Sean a text message expressing her emotional and inviting him to go for a walk. Sean agreed, and the wife spent the evening walking along the river, talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Sean had no intention of winning Samantha over because he already had a girlfriend. After being rejected, Samantha sent Stanley a text message, falsely claiming that Sean had met her and confessed that he liked her. Stanley was very angry. That night, he went up to Sean's room and they talked. At first, they spoke quietly, then argued loudly, and finally fell completely silent. The parents did not intervene in the quarrel between the two brothers because they were used to it. It was the mother who first discovered Sean missing when he did not answer the phone. The night before, Stanley had explained to his mother that Sean had left after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received an unusual call from Sean's sister, Jennifer. In the call, they heard only a woman's screams and a man's moans in the background. After being asked repeatedly to calm down, Jennifer finally spoke clearly to the police. She was still screaming for help and reported that her brother Stanley had killed Sean. She said that Stanley was in the house talking to his mother and that Stanley's father, Samuel, was lying next to Sean's body. She pleaded for immediate help. The police arrived at the crime scene and found a horrific sight in the backyard. Samuel was on his knees, his hands full as he tried to pull his son's body from the wet ground. He screamed and wiped the dirt off Sean. The once peaceful neighborhood, with its beautiful lawns where the two brothers often waved to neighbors, had now become the scene of a tragedy. The Eckard family, who had happily raised 2 sons, now faced terrible grief. One son was dead, and the other was under arrest. Stanley was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his initial interview, he claimed he had no intention of killing his brother. In a fit of rage, Stanley had hit Sean in the head, causing him to fall and die. After realizing his brother was dead, Stanley tied up the body and buried it in the backyard. During the investigation, Stanley said, "I buried him. After all, that's what you do with dead people." This statement sounded cold and emotionless, more like the words of a serial killer than those of a loving brother. To justify his actions, Stanley said that he did it for his mother, he wanting to protect her from the shock of hearing about Sean's death. Stanley planned to move and rebury his younger brother's body after their parents died. During the interrogation, Stanley displayed many different emotions. At times he cried, confessed, and showed remorse, claiming it was an accident. But at other times, he showed hatred and spoke harshly about Sean. He blamed his younger brother for all his troubles and admitted that Sean had won the competition for the love of their mother and Samantha. On the day of the incident, Stanley was charged with second-degree murder and held without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean and submitted the forensic report to the court. The results showed that the victim had bruises under the skin and rope marks on his neck, indicating that he had been compressed, causing difficulty breathing. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete McGo investigated the case thoroughly. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing took place, with District Judge Stephen Rushing presiding. Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckard, sat in the second row, crying as they watched their eldest son being led into the courtroom. On April 9, 2013, Stanley Eckard's trial began in the Hernando Courthouse, with District Judge Anthony Taddy presiding. Attorney Alan Hunter represented the defendant, and Pete McGo was the prosecutor. The prosecutor tried to prove that Stanley had carefully planned the murder. The defense attorney argued that it was just a random fight that went horribly wrong. He also highlighted Stanley's attempts to conceal the crime as a sign of remorse. Stanley Eckard is charged with first-degree murder and could face life in prison if convicted. The trial is scheduled to last 5 days, starting May 13. Judge Anthony Taddy will make the final decision. If convicted of second-degree murder, Stanley could still face life in prison. Stanley Eckard has always maintained that he did not intend to kill his brother. 3 years ago, before burying his brother's body in their front yard, Eckard rejected a prosecutor's offer to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a maximum 20-year prison sentence. Eckard remained calm as the clerk read the verdict. The brothers' parents, Samuel and Donna, wept silently as the jury left the courtroom. Samuel Eckard's sobs turned to screams, and several relatives gathered around to comfort him. The jury agreed that Stanley did not intend to kill his 19-year-old brother, Sean, but they did not completely exonerate him. After about 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury of 9 women and 3 men found Stanley Eckard guilty of second-degree murder. However, the Eckard family still believes Stanley's account of the events that occurred in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010, and criticized the state attorney's office for bringing the case. Samuel Eckard, Stanley's father, praised Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter for his good work in defending the case. The family questioned the appropriateness of the verdict and appealed, but their appeal was denied. Samuel expressed surprise that the jury reached its verdict so quickly but insisted that the family's belief remains unchanged. He also acknowledged one undeniable fact: after his younger brother died, Stanley dragged Sean's body out of his bedroom window and buried it in the backyard of their Spring Hill home. Samuel discovered Sean's body 2 days later. Assistant District Attorney Pete began his closing by showing the jury a photo of Sean's body rolled up in the dirt. Pete emphasized that this was not a cold case and pointed out that Stanley had changed his story several times when questioned about his younger brother's death. Pete went on to say that after Sean's funeral, Stanley forged text messages from Sean's phone, claiming he was in California with his girlfriend. Stanley also forged letters from Sean to Samantha, telling her not to contact him and to focus on Stanley instead. Finally, after hours of questioning, Stanley admitted that Sean had died in a fight in the bedroom. Stanley said he heard Sean's neck snap as they hit the floor. Stanley hid the body to protect his mother, who had heart problems, and planned to tell his father after she left for work. Pete concluded that Stanley caused the injuries that led to Sean's death, which constituted murder. He highlighted Stanley's statement to police about a dispute involving Samantha, as well as Stanley's conversation with his younger brother and a friend about revenge beefo. Sean died. During that conversation, the friend said Stanley mentioned that if he wanted to kill someone, he would hit them in the back of the head and bury them in the yard. However, this evidence was not strong enough to eliminate all reasonable doubt. Alan Lanter, defending, argued that the crime did not involve a deliberate act. Stanley was involved in his younger brother's death, but it was not murder, he said. Alan cited the medical examiner's testimony, saying that the blow to the head, combined with the swelling of his brain from encephalitis, could have caused his death. The pathologist also confirmed that hitting his head on the nightstand and the two fell could have been enough to cause Sean's death. Finally, Alan reminded the jury of Donna Eckard's testimony, which stated that Sean had severe mood swings after suffering from encephalitis. In her testimony, Donna Eckard even called Sean's death an accident. The jury could have found Stanley Eckard guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter, making this an excusable homicide case. Attorney Allen asked the jury not to let the gruesome images of Sean's body and Stanley's actions in burying it distract them from the real cause of his death. Stanley Eckard did a terrible thing after Sean died, but he was not a murderer, Allen stressed. During the final trial, Eckard's parents were devastated when Judge Anthony sentenced Samuel Eckard to 50 years in prison without parole. They felt as if they had lost both their sons on the same day. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Bordon family. The Bordon family's story began in Missouri when Michael and Catherine met as classmates in school. Michael was drawn to Catherine, who was blonde, radiant, and responsive. He used different methods to capture her attention, like helping with homework and inviting her for walks. This led them to become best friends, spending much time together, learning, and sharing secrets. Over time, their friendship blossomed into love. Michael invited Catherine on a date, during which he first expressed his love for her. After some time, they got married in a beautiful and memorable ceremony, where they vowed to love each other through all of life's challenges. 10 years into their marriage, they moved to Lidice, Pennsylvania, a town founded by members of the Moravian Church in 1756 and home to descendants of Moravian communities. Life in the town was calm and serene. Many families were part of the Christian Amish community and lived in a way that reflected their beliefs. They embraced simplicity, choosing to forego many modern technologies. The Bordon family was very religious, so choosing Lidice was intentional. This suburb seemed ideal for raising children, as life there was consistently peaceful. Each day was similar to the previous one, offering the tranquil environment the family of Bordon desired for family life and spiritual connection with God. Michael was involved in the local church, where he taught Sunday school, while Catherine mainly took care of the home and helped her husband with his community work. Michael primarily worked for spiritual fulfillment, but to support his everyday needs, he worked as a manager at a printing company. Over the years, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Most families in Lidice were large, with many having more than 5 children. To protect their children from the challenges and dangers of the wider world, families often attended church, Our local teenagers participated in youth groups and they were homeschooled. Interaction between families was mainly through joint religious organizations and celebrations. The family ideal established by Michael Bordon continued for many years, raising children with faith and discipline. At the beginning of the 2000s, the oldest sons left for university in another city, leaving 3 children at home. These children continued their homeschooling, much to their parents' satisfaction. Neighbors and the couple's few friends praised the children's upbringing and their wide range of interests. Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel were known for being exemplary, kind, and responsive, although this wasn't always the case. However, when Kara, the eldest daughter, hit her teenage years, she totally shook up the family traditions. Against her father's wishes, she started playing for the local soccer team, sneaking out to nightclubs, and doing everything she used to be forbidden from doing. Her behavior affected her father. Long talks and guidance just couldn't get through to Kara. Arguments became frequent and often led to her running away. She openly showed interest in boys and sought out relationships. In 2005, David Ludwig, who was 18, and Kara Bordon, who was 14, met in a support group for students with homeschooling issues. They were both quickly formed a close friendship, unbeknownst to their parents. They decided to create social media profiles to communicate secretly. Their exchanges were frequent and emotional, and they used encoded messages to keep their conversations hidden for as long as possible. After some time, exchanging letters was no longer sufficient, so they started meeting in secret. Initially, they took walks in quiet, secluded areas around the city. Gradually, their friendship turned into a romantic relationship. They began sneaking out at night to go to discos and stayed together until morning. David, being older, had already experienced first love and heartbreak. Kara, on the other hand, was so young that her emotions were overwhelming. Kara was very young, so her emotions were intense. She didn't simply walk, she appeared to glide, with a joyful smile constantly on her lovely face. Meeting David made Kara become obedient to her parents again. Her father was thrilled, thinking the teenage troubles were a thing of the past. But Michael was wrong. It was only the fear of being found out by her parents that calmed the girl's rebellious spirit while she hid her love for David. This saddened Kara a lot, as she knew how her parents would react to relationships at such a young age. Since childhood, they had instilled very different ideas about the possible love between a man and a woman, trying to protect her from that reality for as long as possible. Fearing her parents' negative reaction, they guarded their secret very carefully, but sooner or later, all secrets come to light. One day, Kara couldn't hold back any longer and shared her secret. with her sister. She showed her a photo of David and explained how their relationship started, expressing how deeply in love they were and their determination to be together against all odds. They were even ready to elope. Worried for Kara's safety, her sister told their mother about the elopement plans, revealing the secret of them. Early one morning, Kara quietly climbed through the window into the house and tiptoed to her room, feeling thrilled. She had just returned from a date with David. However, when she entered her room, she froze. Her mother was sitting on her bed, and the situation became pressured without a word being spoken. After breakfast, Kara's parents told her she was not allowed to have any relationship with the young man. Her parents were upset because they had tried to protect their children from violence, drugs, and other negative influences, and they couldn't believe this had happened. Kara's father was so angry and disappointed that he wouldn't let her leave her room that night. However, Kara spent the night at David's house instead. At 5:30 a.m., David dropped her off near her home. They had agreed that Kara would text him as soon as she safely returned to her room. But the message never came. David called her home several times and sent a few messages on social media. An hour later, Kara told him she had been caught and asked him to come over so her parents could talk to him. David arrived on time for the meeting. The conversation started with Kara's father expressing strong anger and forbidding David from seeing his daughter. Kara's parents held very conservative values and were firmly against her having relationships at such a young age. The father's heart was unmoved by David's words of love. He warned David that if he saw him with Kara again, he would report him to the police for being involved with a minor. Despite the long and emotional discussion, it ended without resolution. Kara was locked in her room once more, and David left empty. Indeed. He got into his old car and drove away, crying for the first time over a girl, or perhaps because he felt he wasn't taken seriously. The separation was very difficult. The lovers struggled with being apart and couldn't handle it, so they decided to deceive everyone. They pretended to break up to meet Kara's father's demands but continued their secret love affair. In public or at church, they acted like ex-lovers and didn't even acknowledge each other. Kara's parents felt reassured, believing they had safeguarded their daughter from a rash decision. David missed Kara deeply. In the evenings, he read Shakespeare, dreaming of serenading her openly like Romeo. However, like in the Capulet and Montague story, the lovers couldn't reconcile their families to win their approval. David Ludwig took determined steps regarding his relationship with Kara. He called her home to arrange a meeting with her father, intending to discuss their plans to marry. On November 13, 2015, David arrived at the Bordon residence to speak with Michael, Kara's father. He expressed his love for Kara, their ongoing relationship, and their intention to get married. Michael dismissed the idea, saying it would never happen. Expecting such a reaction, David, driven by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he was heading to the front door. David then went to find Kara's mother, Catherine, and shot her while she was sitting in a chair. David searched the house for Kara, calling her name, but he couldn't find her. Later, as he was driving away, he saw Kara running towards him down the road. She got into the car and told David she wanted to leave, get married, and start a new life far away. They fled the city in David's red car. But why would a 14-year-old girl run away with someone who had just been so brutal? Wasn't she shocked and scared? Both were seen as good kids. How did they become criminals? Kara Bordon went missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Bordon, were found dead. After examining surveillance footage, the police tracked the teenagers. The footage showed that Kara went with David willingly, so the charges of abducting her were dropped against David. Alerts were sent across the east as police in Pennsylvania and Indiana investigated reports of the couple heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching that description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. However, when the police arrived, the car was gone. State police were alerted, and patrol officers spotted the car on I-70 in Belleville around noon. David Ludwig entered the interstate and led them on a 5-mile chase, reaching speeds of 90 to 95 miles per hour on a 2-lane highway. State Trooper Alex, who participated in the pursuit, described David as extremely reckless and dangerous, causing multiple accidents like scenes from an action movie. The saga of the runaway lovers became a major national news story. Television broadcasts showed the capture of the teenage fugitives after the boy had killed his girlfriend's parents and fled with her. It was revealed that David and Kara planned to escape far away, get married, and start a new life. The district attorney announced that the earlier Kara abduction charge against David would be dismissed, but the charges for the deaths of Michael and Catherine would continue. After the incident, David and Kara fled together and were on the run from the authorities for about 28 hours before being captured in Indiana. Kara did not face any charges. David was held without bail on charges of murder and abduction. Kara was placed under the care of relatives and church members. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, after a high-speed chase that ended when his vehicle crashed into a tree. He was charged with the deaths of the Michael and Catherine following a prolonged conflict. 14-year-old Kara did not face any charges. On November 16, David was extradited back to Pennsylvania after waiving extradition. David confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that it was a deliberate act and that he intended to shoot them if they got in their way, which he did. During the young man's arrest, the police searched his vehicle and found no weapons. However, when they went to David's home, they discovered 54 firearms belonging to his father, a hunter who had taught David how to use them. In an 18-minute video from a laptop found in the house, David is seen discussing a plan to invade another family's home. The video also shows him bringing weapons into the house. According to court documents, finally he decided not to go through with the plan because there were too many cars at the location. The police declared Kara Bordon a victim in the case, yet David filed court documents claiming that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove she was not abducted. David did not resist efforts to return him to Pennsylvania. A Pennsylvania judge ordered him held without bail. He was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation. A preliminary hearing was set for November 23. The trial of David was brief. According to court documents, Kara's 13-year-old sister, Caitlin, told investigators that her parents were shot after arguing with David for about an hour. Caitlin saw David shoot her father and then ran to the bathroom, where she heard a second shot, presumably the one that took her mother's life. David then ran through the house calling for Kara. She told investigators that the couple's 9-year-old son, Daniel, ran to neighbors who called 911, reporting the tragic event. In June 2006, David entered a plea agreement with District Attorney Donald R. Totaro, who had sought the death penalty as punishment. David pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree perpetrating, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life in prison sentences. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara has been under guardianship represented by legal counsel. In a written statement published on November 22, 2005, the abduction charge against David was dropped, with the court concluding that Kara left with David of her own free will. David's lawyer reportedly stated that Kara voluntarily accompanied David during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance recordings showed that Kara had ample opportunity to escape. Kara admitted that she ran after David as he left her house. She simply wished to marry her beloved David. Kara has been identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and thus the district attorney of Lancaster County did not levy any criminal charges against her. Her actions alongside David's during the investigation and the digital trail of emails, blogs, and texts they left behind contributed to this decision. At a solemn memorial service held at Lancaster Bible College, Kara, amidst her siblings, mourned her pair. NTS. The Bordon family's neighborhood showed its respect and remembrance by adorning mailboxes with white ribbons. The loss left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. George Landis, an elder from the Monterey Chapel, reflected on the incident by saying that the purpose behind such loss is known only to God, reassuring that Michael and Catherine are in a better place. Vera Zimmerman, 50, familiar with the Bordon family and David's mother for 7 years, remarked on the upbringing of the children, pointing out that a lapse in judgment led to the unfortunate events. David's appeal for release was finally denied by the state appeals court, as reported by the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office after his sentencing on June 20th. David underwent several evaluations at Camp Hill before being transferred to a state prison in Indiana County, where he began serving his life sentence for the murder of his girlfriend's parents. The tragic case of the Bordon family serves as a haunting reminder of how seemingly innocent relationships can spiral into devastating consequences. What began as a story of young love evolved into a dark tale of rebellion, betrayal, and violence, leaving an entire family shattered and 2 lives forever altered. The aftermath of this heartbreaking event highlights the fragility of trust, the dangers of secrecy, and the far-reaching impact of a single, catastrophic decision.